All right, guys, welcome. Thank you for joining us here on YouTube. We are the Big Fundamental Podcast, the Kins 5 podcast on the San Antonio Spurs and NBA basketball. I'm Jackson Floyd.
I'm Cameron Songer.
And Cameron, we're doing this live today, this very special YouTube live, because it's a very big day in NBA basketball. Space Jam 2 is kind of going on the way there.
There's absolutely nothing else happening.
So let's talk about that. Movies and the Hollywood. No, of course. This is the NBA draft, the 2019 NBA draft. One of the biggest nights of the NBA offseason and season. I mean, so many storylines, so many players on the move. Where are we right now in the draft?
Well, as we're talking about this right now, it looks like the number 6 pick is being made. It says that it's Phoenix making the pick. However, they're picking for Minnesota because a trade that was made earlier today.
That's right. Darius Garland for the number 6 pick.
And they swap picks. So
cool.
The Suns are moving down from 6 to 11, and they're getting Darius Garland in return. I like that pick for Phoenix a lot. They're really, you think about what is their identity right now. They've got a lot of youth. DeAndre Ayton and Devin Booker, they're two best guys. Devin Booker, obviously a big-time shooter. DeAndre Ayton has the ability to shoot a little bit, but now I think by adding a starting caliber power forward to that team in Sarge, who's a floor spacer, you're going to open up a lot more space for DeAndre Ayton to do big man things inside. And I love it. I love that there is at least an opportunity for a team to still be playing a post kind of game, because so many teams now, look at the Warriors and Rockets, they're basically shooting more threes than they do twos, and that's kind of unheard of.
So it looks like the pick is in, they're making their selection, and they're taking Jarrett Culver going to Minnesota there. That's a guard to put alongside Karl Anthony Towns, Andrew Wiggins there. They seem to have been kind of missing a guard on that team. Or?
That team is in a weird spot. I know they've been trying to shop Andrew Wiggins a little bit. His contract kicks in this year, I believe, and it's a big one. So they're thinking about potentially moving him. He hasn't really developed the way they want him to. It's obvious Karl Anthony Towns is their franchise guy. And their team, they made the playoffs in 2018, sort of slid back a little bit this year. It was a weird year for them. It started with Jimmy Butler, ended with them trading Darius Garland. So they got in the Jimmy Butler trade. So now I think maybe sort of a soft reset for that Minnesota team. And Jarrett Culver is a guy who's going to help, I think, a lot with that. And you think about who defined this past season for Minnesota, and Derrick Rose's name keeps coming up in my mind. And so, yeah, it's been a weird year for them.
And Culver is someone who kind of made a name for himself in the big stage through the NCAA tournament. The shooting guard from Texas Tech kind of helped the Red Raiders in their finals, on the push to the finals there. He's a guy, I think, that people, you see reports that maybe he's similar to someone like Harrison Barnes, someone who can shoot the ball, someone who can play some defense, might be good there in Minnesota. Let's take a look back at the other 5 picks that we've kind of missed. I think going into the draft here, the talk was the 3 picks were locked in. Number 1, Zion Williamson to the New Orleans Pelicans. Number 2, Ja Morant to the Memphis Grizzlies. And number 3, RJ Barrett to the Knicks. How do you think those guys are going to play for those teams? Is there, other than, I mean, clearly this is the Zion draft, but those other guys, superstar potential there? Or?
Ja Morant, I really like his game. You don't put up the numbers he did in college. You could say, he wasn't playing against the greatest competition. He was a 20-10 guy in college. It's crazy. No one has done that, I don't think. So to pair him along Jaren Jackson Jr. there in Memphis, they'll have a nice youth. It's gonna be a little bit of a rebuild, but I think they're gonna be on a pretty good timeline. I like their timeline, and I also like the Atlanta Hawks timeline. I think there are a lot of teams who, you go back maybe 2 years ago and looked at the layout of the NBA and said, it's Golden State's league right now. There's still a LeBron to contend with. Even back then, you're looking at maybe the potential of LeBron coming to the Western Conference, which has obviously manifested itself. So you start to think about what can you do. You don't want to do a Philadelphia full process of 4, 5, 6 years, whatever. But to start to rebuild a little bit, Memphis, I think, maybe could have pulled the trigger on that a little while ago. You saw it start with the trade of Marc Gasol, and then now with Mike Conley also getting traded.
Just a few days ago to the Utah Jazz,
Yeah, so really leaning into that rebuild.
I mean, that Grizzlies team, if you think back at the team they had over the last decade, they were so defined by this grit and grind kind of attitude. And, I mean, you talked a little bit about Ja Morant's offensive skills, really kind of building a new identity for themselves as a high-powered offense, high-caliber offense. That's the way people are playing. Like you said, the Warriors, the Rockets, all these teams are taking threes. I think Ja Morant's the kind of guy that kind of pushed them in that direction.
Yeah, and he's so explosive. I mean, some of the comps for what the experts were talking about with him, they said he's like De'Aaron Fox, but more explosive. And I mean, if you've watched the Sacramento Kings recently, and I know that they're not like the most popular team to be watching, De'Aaron Fox is so fast and really pretty explosive. So very exciting potential there that the Grizzlies are looking at those 2 top 3 picks pretty recently. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. is going to be poised for a pretty big year. If I'm not mistaken, he was taken at age 19. So we'll talk a little bit more over the course of this podcast, Jackson. What are the values, the relative pluses and minuses of taking a 19-year-old versus a 20, 21, or 22-year-old?
Yeah.
There's even a couple 23-year-olds who are still floating around in the draft as potential first-round guys.
You forget these guys are so young.
Right.
It's insane.
Right. I mean, and you're talking about a guy like Brandon Ingram right now, who I think just turned
21.
21, yeah.
He's
He's going to be joining. He's going to be in his 3rd year in the league, or 4th year in the league.
People are starting to write off these guys. They think, oh yeah, Brandon Ingram, Lonzo Ball, they are who they are. NBA players enter their prime in 24, 25, 26, towards the end of their 20s. These guys have so much of their career in front of them. So you get a guy like Ja Morant, you got to, take that expectation. Sure, you're looking for some instant offense. You're looking for some instant boost to kind of help the team out there. But, this is also a 5-year plan that Memphis has here. Get these young guys in. That's kind of the process we've seen people take in these rebuilds. We've got another pick in, I believe, or is it Chicago's on the clock right now?
Chicago's, from what it's looking like, they're expected to take Kobe White out of North Carolina. Very fun player to watch. He has probably the best hair of anyone in the draft. Got that big afro. Yeah. So you're not going to miss him on the court. Interesting fit there with Chicago. I'm surprised they haven't tried to go after a splashier free agent. I'm surprised that in all of the discussions of, where are the top free agent destinations, and it keeps coming up as Clippers, Lakers, Nets, and Knicks. Miami has obviously been a top free agent destination for a while. Orlando, not as much. And Chicago, you'd think it should be a top free agent destination, but they don't have their cap situation was a little bit messed up over the last year.
Yeah, they say that this is the era of players wanting to go to big markets, and Chicago is a huge market, but no one wants to go there for whatever reason. I'm unsure of what they're trying to do with their rebuild. I mean, I think Lauri Markkanen is the centerpiece there. They have plenty of directions they can go. Maybe Kobe White is the way they want to go with a guard like that. So let's take a jump back here and just talk about some of the other kind of picks. We talked about Ja Morant for the Memphis Grizzlies. Through that, you were also saying that one of the other teams that you really like the direction they're heading is the Atlanta Hawks, and they came out today, made a big splash, traded for that number 4 pick from the Pelicans. They came into the draft having 2 top 10, and now they went with number 4, traded up, and got their guy that they wanted in DeAndre Hunter.
Yeah, I think it's a great fit for that team. They have some young guys. Trae Young is a young guy. Kevin Huerter is a young guy. John Collins, who's been in the league a couple years, he's still a young guy. DeAndre Hunter is a little bit more experienced. He's sort of been around a few times, a key college player, a lot of seasoning in the ACC, and maybe doesn't have the highest, might not be a super duper star, but when you feel like you have your franchise guys, kind of the last thing you want to do is swing for the fences again. Mm-hmm. You'd rather hit that double rather than try to swing for the fences and hit a home run. You'd even be happy with a single if there's men on bases, to kind of extend this metaphor a little bit, because when you have the number 4 pick, yes, you could. There are superstars who've been drafted with the number 4 pick before, but there's also been guys who really flame out kind of quickly. And when you feel like you have your foundation pretty well set, and you're confident in that, and again, the results haven't necessarily been there for the Hawks, but this is still very early in that process for them, you're more happy with using that number 4 pick to get a guy who's going to be a solid rotation player for your team, is going to help contribute, especially right away. That's big time. Yeah, I mean, that's a front office that comes from the Golden State Warriors, and they've kind of taken that model, that idea of building a team like Golden State in Atlanta. They've got their Steph Curry with Trae Young. I don't know if Kevin Huerter is Klay Thompson, but he's a shooter. There's a guy from the outside who can light it up. I guess DeAndre Hunter fits that Andre Iguodala, that stalwart on the defensive side there. He's not as big as Andre Iguodala. Maybe give it some time. He can get an NFL body or NBA body going on. An NFL body wouldn't hurt either. Right. I think Iguodala has an NFL body, but yeah. So I mean, that's like you said, they're on the right path here. John Collins is another guy. I don't see where he fits in the Warriors thing. He's not. Obviously not Draymond Green. He's not Draymond. Nobody's Draymond Green. No, but that's a team that's rebuilding here. So, all right, Hawks are on the clock now. This is the pick that goes to New Orleans, the number 8 pick here. Yes. Cool. Yes, the Hawks keep the 10th pick because they made that trade last year with Dallas.
That's
when
right.
there was the discussion of should they have taken Trae Young over Luka Doncic.
This is a front office that identifies the guys that they want in the draft. They really wanted Trae Young, it sounded like, made the trade out of that number 2 spot,
I think
number
it was
3 spot
yeah.
for Doncic. This year, obviously, it seems like they wanted DeAndre Hunter, and they didn't think he'd be around at the number 8 pick. The mocks kind of, if you look around at what reporters are saying, I think he would have lasted till 8.
There's a good chance.
Yeah, but you don't want to take that chance if that's your guy. So.
Right.
So Kobe White is going to the Bulls. We talked about. In case you're wondering, if you're watching along with us, if we're on your second screen and you got the draft on, if you're wondering why it says, "Oh, I know this pick was traded to the Pelicans," it says Hawks up there. Trades aren't in effect until July 6th. So
At
all
the
these
earliest,
teams have to kind of draft in good faith, right, for these players, for these people. If you're following along on YouTube, feel free to ask your questions, any comments, share your thoughts. We'll get to them. We'll address them. We've got YouTube open here, so we're following along with you as well. Any other thoughts you got on the draft so far?
Zion Williamson. I mean, the drama around it. Granted, we knew that there wasn't going to be anyone else picked there. We knew he was going to be the guy there. But to see the joy in New Orleans to finally get to hear that name announced and finally get to begin that process and see the emotion on his face. I mean,
my gosh.
We've seen it a little bit on Twitter. People kind of maybe poking some fun at the guy. And this comes from a player who maybe during the lottery when they had the cameras on him, he maybe didn't look so happy to be going to New Orleans. He knew he was going to be the number 1 pick.
There was a lot of kind of stories about, maybe he would try to force his way to another team, or maybe he'd sit out and things like that. He definitely seemed to be happy to be joining the NBA tonight.
Happy to be joining the NBA, and I think he has to know that this is a Pelicans team that's going to invest in him heavily. He is their version of Anthony Davis in this go-around. They gave it a good try with Anthony Davis over the course of 7 years. Had some injuries, maybe rushed the process a little bit, put some guys around Anthony Davis when they maybe could have been bad, intentionally, maybe not tanked, but let some more assets develop. Instead, they really made a playoff push pretty quickly when they knew what Davis was. Again, it's very comparable. A 19-year-old coming in, and you're building around him. Maybe maybe they'll do things a little bit differently. It's a different front office here in New Orleans now, but he's their guy. New Orleans is very happy to have him. They didn't have the greatest chance at getting the number 1 pick, so they feel very lucky. And what a bounce back from Anthony Davis, who kind of left unceremoniously.
Exactly. You mentioned the kind of people they put around Anthony Davis, and they never kind of surrounded him with a young core. They never built with him. They always tried to surround him with role players. They got, DeMarcus Cousins. They got Drew Holiday. They tried the Omer Ashik role to kind of put a center next to him that would take some of that rebounding and the defensive pressure off of him. But yeah, it seems like they're going a different way here with Zion. They're using draft picks, collecting assets. They're going to build with him, I think, here, and that's the right way to do it, I believe. And that's what they're going to do with this pick here. Take another guy in the draft. Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN is reporting it's going to be Jackson Haynes, a center, to put next to Zion Williams.
That makes sense. He's not really going to play the 5 at 6'7", 6'8".
You're talking about Zion here.
Yeah. And so if this is the case, you're looking for a guy who is going to complement Zion and allow the team to do interesting and exciting things. And when you think about Jackson Hayes, he's what a lot of people said was a blank slate. Very raw, but a lot of potential. Extremely most of these centers we're talking about now, they're 6'10", 6'11", 7 foot, but the wingspan of 7'2", 7'3". And Jackson Hayes right there is a guy who's going to be an explosive leaper and contributing in maybe almost creating like a new Lob City, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy I think who excels in the pick and roll a little bit too. If you've got Zion Williamson handling the ball, Jackson Hayes setting the pick for him and rolling off of that, that's a little unstoppable. There's some big boys there playing the back and forth there. But I mean, I think there's also a little bit of flexibility with Zion if they want to do a similar to a lineup of death in the Golden State Warriors way there. Put Zion at the center. I mean, there's still some flexibility there. I don't think you want him playing 10 minutes a game at the center, but so building around him there, and that's the kind of the teams that you're talking about who are building here for the future. It's New Orleans, it's Atlanta, it's these early teams that we're seeing here in the lottery, kind of making waves, making moves, and kind of setting a direction here for the next foreseeable future.
Yeah, and as we're talking, as we're seeing now, it's looking like it's Jackson Hayes there at 8 to the Hawks, who will be sending it to the Pelicans, to the Hawks, who send it to the Pelicans in exchange for that DeAndre Hunter 4 and 8 swap. Jackson Hayes was sort of the first guy. We did some preparation in terms of guys who might fall to the Spurs at 19, and cast a pretty wide net because this is really beyond the top 3. The line has been, this is a pretty wide open draft beyond that sort of top 3, top 4, top 5. Jackson Hayes, a guy who some mocks have had as high as the top 10, which is what we're seeing, and then as low as potentially falling to out of the lottery. The comparison on him is another University of Texas guy in Jarrett Allen, according to some. Also, maybe a Clint Capella, a rim running kind of guy. His father was an NFL tight end.
Wow.
And he played some wide receiver in high school. So just imagine that, 6'11" with a 7'4" wingspan right now. I don't think that was where he was maybe as a freshman or sophomore in high school, but that was, LeBron James did that. He played some wide receiver in high school before focusing on basketball. That's scary.
Yeah, he's probably got some leaping ability. He's got some hands there. All that stuff translates to the NBA.
Yeah, 6'11" with a 7'4" wingspan next to Zion Williamson. Good luck trying to drive the paint against those guys. Zion Williamson, they were playing some of the highlights of him as a shot blocker, two-handed shot blocker, pinning the ball against the backboard. I don't know if Hayes is going to be your starting center right away. He's pretty raw, but the fact that you could potentially have those two guys out there at the same time, depending on crunch time lineups, yikes.
Yeah, this is a team that I guess, like you said, you might not start center. They still need to put a few pieces around there, but they're heading the right direction following that Anthony Davis trade. Again, they've got Lonzo Ball, Drew Holiday coming back. Who knows what Brandon Ingram can be from his injury, but he showed good signs, good promise there. He's got a good future, hopefully, if he can return to the court. So we'll see.
I think another thing you'd like to point out is that something that happened in the NBA over the last 3 or 4 years is teams started building, how do we beat the Warriors? What do we do roster construction-wise? Learn from them a little bit, but also let's put guys out there who are bad matchups to beat the Warriors. And we saw the Houston Rockets come so close. We saw the Spurs come pretty close. Not to rewind too far and pour too much salt in this wound right now, but without a certain Zaza Pachulia, that vaunted Warriors team of 2017, that was the first year Kevin Durant was on that team, the Spurs were ahead in Game 1 of that playoff series.
Not just ahead, by 26 points.
In Oracle.
Yeah.
And that was the Western Conference Finals, right?
That was the Western Conference Finals, Game 1.
So there's a world where, things turn up kind of differently for Kawhi and the Spurs, for one. But the Spurs are another example of a team that you find they were built, and then again, they were coming off not too far off of a championship run pretty recently. Tim Duncan had just retired, he had just retired. That was his first year without him. So they were sort of transitioning into a new era, and that they, like every other Western Conference competitor, they were saying, how do we build to beat the Warriors? I think the new thing in the NBA that you might start seeing, especially in the Eastern Conference, how do we beat Giannis?
Yeah. He's the next guy, the next man up.
Because he is unlike so many other things. He defies so much of the basketball normalcy and what he's able to do and how he, is able to bend the floor and, defy gravity and change the way the game is played. Get a long shot blocker. Get a guy who's going to stop him at the rim. Get a wing who can stay with him, and then get another guy who's going to be that back line of defense and shut him down at the rim. And I think that's a step that that any team needs to be thinking about making.
Are you seeing a Zion versus Giannis playoff matchup in the future? Maybe an NBA Finals 2026 or something like that.
Wow,
jumping way far ahead.
Wow, yeah, that is. I don't think so because I think there was a world at one point where people saw LeBron James getting drafted and say, who's he going to run into? It's probably going to be Kobe, and that never happened.
Exactly.
That was sort of the great. I'm not gonna say great misfortune of our era. That's a bit hype. That's a bit much.
It's the what could have been. Though,
man, can you imagine? That would have been really, really fun if that had come to pass. So so you think about guys who are not quite lined up in the exact same era, but very similar. And Giannis versus Zion would certainly bring in the ratings. It would certainly bring in the eyeballs. They're just not. They're not lined up right there. And
exactly.
As the pick that comes in next is Washington taking Rui Hachimura
That's very interesting. Washington's another team that's very wide open in terms of what they could have done with this pick. Of course, they're without John Wall for another year, it sounds like, because he's coming back from injury. They've still got a star in Bradley Beal, who's kind of been mentioned in a couple of maybe rumors about maybe being moved and things like that. They bring in Rui Hachimura, who at Gonzaga was kind of known for being a 3-and-D kind of guy, had a good shot, but really was a defensive kind of playmaker there. What do you think about this pick here?
This is a surprising one for me, and to me it suggests maybe the Wizards are leaning a little bit more towards trade Bradley Beal. Hachimura is a very talented player, did a lot of great things at Gonzaga, but I think he's also still not quite there. He's not the kind of guy who is, and again, this is now the number 9 pick in a draft that's not particularly deep to this point.
You're going to find more raw talent there.
You really are choosing between raw, high-ceiling guys and slightly more polished but lower-ceiling kind of guys. There aren't as many home run kind of guys out there on the board left now that we're out of the top 8. We're into the back half of the lottery. But Hachimura, I think, needs a little bit more seasoning, a little bit more time. And if you think about where the Wizards are in their contention cycle, Bradley Beal is not going to get any more valuable, I don't think. And he's almost the guy, if you really were trying to tank and really trying to be bad for a couple of years and start to build up that draft capital, you'd want to get rid of him sooner rather than later, because he's going to carry you to a bunch of wins. And if you're trying to get the best draft pick, you don't want that.
Exactly. And Washington, I guess, coming into this offseason, it was a new front office. They got rid of Ernie Grunfeld, who'd been kind of become infamous there in D.C. They kind of had two directions. They could have kept Beal and kind of try to build a contender on him, or just try to kind of float along as it is. Or, I mean, they've got the time here with Wall out. Wall's under a contract that people have said is one of the worst in the NBA right now, especially with that injury. He's going to be locked in at $40 million, I think, by the end of that, which is 4 years in the future. That's time to start rebuilding, to start getting players that need 4 years to kind of sharpen into an NBA player, NBA quality player, starting talent kind of thing. So that seems to be the direction they're heading, like you were saying here. You mentioned not a lot of home run guys left on the board. I think there's one guy I might consider a home run guy still left on the board, and that's Duke's Cam Reddish. The Atlanta Hawks are on the clock now, and there's been some sources linking them to that pick. I mean, again, this is a Hawks team that I think is making the right moves. If they can bring in someone like Reddish, who has some question marks around him, he played along Zion Williamson and along Jarrett Barrett at Duke, and was kind of the third guy there, the third wheel, if you will. But I think that's a strong pick for the Hawks if that's the direction they go.
Yeah, I think, by this point, we talked about what the Hawks have already added, what they've been able to do in sort of moving up a little bit. At this point, I think with your second pick, you go for the best guy on the board. And R.J. Barrett, Cam Reddish is definitely that guy.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy to have overlooked him as kind of a third wheel at Duke, but you get to Duke and you get to be playing the kinds of minutes he did for a reason. He was a very talented player, and I think part of the problem with these Duke guys, especially R.J. Barrett and Reddish, Zion not as much. Everyone knew he was going to be number one, but their games were so heavily scrutinized, and they were always, primetime TV, leading Sports Center, talking heads, most eyeballs, is that they really were nitpicked a lot. These are still really good players.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much tape on these guys. People start saying, you look at a guy like Darius Garland, for instance, only played 5 games in college, not a lot of tape on him, so people are approaching him more of a glass half full, excited about what they've seen. With a guy like Cam Reddish, yeah, you start getting into the nitty-gritty there. That's a Duke team that I think, even though they made it to the, Elite 8 in the NCAA Final Four, I can't remember, yeah, it was Elite 8.
Yeah.
People see that as like, they didn't meet their expectations. They didn't meet as great as they could have been. They had a ceiling of everyone was expecting a finals, like easy cakewalk to the NCAA finals. And so, yeah, people start getting down on some of like R.J. Barrett. A lot of people nitpicked him. Cam Reddish the same way. But I think that would be a good fit for the Hawks there.
Yeah, at number 10. Let's go back a little bit, though, back to number 9. Talk a little bit more about Rui Hachimura.
Yeah, we jumped ahead a little bit.
Yeah, and want to give him a huge shout. He's the first player born in Japan to be drafted in the first round. And I think drafted at all in the NBA. There have been Japanese-born players in the NBA, but he's the first to be drafted.
I will say the draft broadcast during his when he was picked did mention learned English at Gonzaga. So
that's crazy to think about. He came over. He did play 3 years at Gonzaga, so he's not a young guy. We do talk about him being a little bit raw, but he's a little bit older than some of these young raw guys. But you want to talk about bringing over a fan base to Washington D.C. and with that Wizards team, especially a team that sort of has. They don't really have that appeal. The curb appeal as much. That Washington, they had that before with John Wall, but his time of being the face and the big story who brings eyeballs in is kind of over. People know what they're getting with him at this point. We saw though and this is obviously very different with Yao Ming
throwing it back,
and the whole Chinese market. Coming and becoming fans of Houston. And it's kind of stayed that way even years after his retirement. Japan, a slightly different basketball market, both in terms of interest in the sport and the number of people that they can be bringing in. But I think it's great for the Wizards, and it's great for the game to be continuing to bring international guys in and continuing to grow the game and expand the game.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, you see, like, when Yao was taken, basketball exploded in China. And I don't think Yao ever reached his potential. He couldn't stay healthy. I mean, that Rockets team had some other problems too with Tracy McGrady. Never really made a run, but basketball still took off in China. And you see the professional leagues they have over there. You see former NBA players going over there and embracing the love, like Stephen Marbury, is, I think, a basketball god in China now. Maybe something like that happens in Japan. You see it like Luka Doncic. His country kind of embraced the Mavericks, embraced him as well. I could see the Wizards kind of gaining a Japanese fan base, like you said there. So Hawks just kind of are still on the clock here. We're expecting it to be Cam Reddish. And that wraps up the top 10. Any kind of surprises or anything that stands out to you here?
I'm going to keep it on Rui Hachimura. I think it's a little surprising to see him come off the board as early as he did. For the number of needs that these teams in the drafting the top 10 had, to go with a guy who still has quite a few question marks around him. He's a great leader, a pretty good athlete, but his game, his feel for the game still has a little ways to go. One of the big knocks against him, he's not quite big enough to play power forward in the NBA, and he's not really a good enough shooter to be a small forward. And that's a theme we'll get to with a lot of the guys in tonight's draft. The shooting touch isn't quite there. There are a couple knockdown shooters and really good scorers, but a lot of guys who they're a jump shot away. And boy, is that something that you say about a lot of players who are all-star caliber players in the NBA. I mean, Ben Simmons, Giannis Antetokounmpo are the first two that come to mind where you say, boy, if they just had a jump shot.
Yeah, everything would be golden. Yeah, exactly.
And these are still, these are max salary guys. They're really great NBA players, and they can't really shoot. So the fact that there are guys coming in who don't have a jump shot, that continues to be the number one thing you see in the NBA draft, where guys who are long and athletic and don't have the best feel for the game and can't really shoot, they continue to be drafted because coaches love to think that they can be the one who unlocks the jump shot, unlocks the potential. And sometimes guys don't end up getting matched up properly with the right coach, and sometimes they do. I'll mention Kawhi Leonard again, because no one thought when he came into the league he was going to be really much of anything on offense, or really the defensive stopper he turned out to be. But yeah, especially the offense. That was the big knock. He couldn't shoot.
I think the book on him wasn't it wasn't that he was a jump shot away from being a star. It was like he was a jump shot away from being a starter in the league.
Right.
And he came into the league, worked, improved it otherwise. You talked about Rui Hachimura being your surprise here. My surprise is the Hawks making that jump up to 4 to grab the player that they really wanted in DeAndre Hunter. I still think you don't have to go for that number 4 spot. Maybe that was the trade that was open for them. But if that's the guy you reach for, that's the guy. And I think that's a team, like we've been saying, really is pushing towards the future. Honestly, in the Eastern Conference, there's a lot of wide open spots there. I think there's a couple playoff teams this year, from last year, who aren't going to be in the playoffs this year, like the Detroit Pistons. I think that's a team that could fall off there. Maybe there's a chance these Hawks end up being like the Brooklyn Nets last year and kind of make a push for that playoff position. If Trae Young can come back, prove himself to the second half of his season was amazing. So if he can ride that wave, keep working on some things in the offseason, working on his ball handling skills, his playmaking skills, that's a team that, could make a playoff push here in that first. I mean, they're adding so much young talent, so a playoff run for them would kind of maybe be like the first Thunder run when, Kevin Durant was still 24 years old and Russell Westbrook was 23 years old. These really young players, getting that playoff experience is really helpful.
Yeah, as talking about this Atlanta team now with this addition of Cam Reddish, who they're picking up. The
Real
Chauncey
quick.
Billups' comparison was Paul George, and that seems like a bit of a stretch,
That's
but I don't know.
All right. What about the jacket, though, that he's wearing?
Okay,
I don't know
all
if you
right.
can see it at home if you're watching along here, but it's kind of got a gold trim around. He's got the gold chain as well.
I was saying this before we went on. I don't know why these guys can't put on a necktie. Call me old school, Jackson. When you put on a suit, just put on a tie. There's a lot of. It doesn't have to be flashy. The skinny tie is very popular, especially with some of these young guys who are tall, and it complements their lanky. It sort of accentuates how much wingspan they've got.
I think you're just taking it personal because you guys share the same first name.
Okay.
The Cams.
You know what? If next time I'm in a room with Cam Reddish, people are just going to say, they're not going to be able to tell us apart.
They'll say, "Hey, Cam," and
we'll both look, and yeah. It's going to be embarrassing for him, because of who I am and everything.
So we've kind of been talking through the top 10 here. We blew past a pick in discussion this year. We haven't yet addressed the Cleveland Cavaliers taking Darius Garland with the number 6 pick, I believe.
Number 5.
Number 5 pick, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes, we came on during the 6th pick. So the Cavaliers took Darius Garland. He's a combo guard they can put next to Colin Sexton, who they took last year, believing he'd be their point guard of the future.
Yeah.
How do you think about those two playing together?
You can't have too many playmakers. The one thing you don't want to do is put yourself in a situation where you have 5 guys on the floor and really there's only one guy who can dribble and pass. Makes it really easy for the other team to defend you. You want guys who other teams have to respect, both as shooters, dribble drive, and passers. And there might be some issues with guys who like to be ball dominant. Again, not a lot of tape on Garland. That was sort of the one thing we talked about with his game, about saying, okay, the Duke guys have been on TV a lot, and there's a lot of film on them, and everyone's seen them and has opinions about them. Darius Garland's kind of, who knows, in a lot of ways similar to one of these guys who maybe goes overseas for a year, or an overseas player himself, where there's not a lot of hype, just because all he's been doing for the last 6 months has been working out, getting his body right, and preparing for the NBA draft, to the point where he's been out of the public eye.
Yeah. Like you said, he's focused, I think, a lot on getting healthy, preparing for the NBA season. It sounds like he's going to be ready by the time the season starts around, but that's still a summer to kind of develop and everything like that. He's a guy, we were talking a little bit, like you can take the proven player who can come in, immediately add solid minutes in a rotation, and then there are the home run guys. And this guy is clearly a swing for the fences kind of player. For a city in Cleveland that needs one, that's a rebuild that is going the wrong way, I think.
Yeah, I don't think they were happy with Colin Sexton. If you redo that draft, I don't think Colin Sexton is as high as Cleveland took him. He's their guy right now, and I think they're also in a situation where they still have some of these guys left over from the LeBron era. Kevin Love, J.R. Smith in particular, they might try to move on from. However, there's also this rebuilding component, and you try to just get talent. You get talent out there on the floor, and you hope for the best, and you hope that if the guy is talented but doesn't fit with your system, that you can still flip him. And I think Darius Garland represents that potential, just because there are so many teams will be interested in a guy who brings what he brings, that maybe he might have the kind of career where the first or spot or two he ends up isn't where he finishes his career.
Yeah, he might move around, be kind of a journeyman for a bit, and then find a home that kind of fits for him here. So we're now moving out of the top 10. The number 11 pick is in. It's Minnesota making the pick. That pick goes to Phoenix. Phoenix is taking Cam Johnson, a small forward. From North Carolina.
What a stretch for Camerons, by the way.
Yeah, right.
Cam Reddish, now Cameron Johnson. It's a great night to be a Cameron, and if we have another Cameron here watching, let us know in the comments.
Maybe
please.
2019 is the year of the Cameron. We'll see.
You know what, Jackson? Every year is the year of the Cameron.
Okay, all right.
That's channeling my Bill Walton there with that one.
So, Phoenix has kind of been locked in a rebuild for the last 4 or 5 years. They have a player who is a bona fide superstar, a guy in Devin Booker who can drop 60 points at will, it seems. But they haven't done a lot of winning. And I think a lot of players on that team, Booker especially, have really been raring at the bit to make a playoff run. Do you think they're kind of working towards that? Are they still in rebuild mode? They traded for Saric earlier. That's a guy who can start for them. Maybe this is the year they start making that push. Has something changed?
Yeah, this is a really interesting pick. I'm a little blown away by this. Seems like a really big reach for Phoenix.
I think
this is a guy who was projected in some mock drafts to not even be taken in the first round.
Wow.
And they just took him at 11. The Cameron Johnson has one NBA skill right now. He is an incredibly good shooter. Shot 45% from behind the arc last year. He has the potential to be a 3-and-D guy. His defense isn't quite there. The shooting is what's there. So Phoenix, you talked about teams that, it feels like they've had some questions. They've missed on some draft picks. They are right now, it looks like, building around shooting. Devin Booker, now with Dario Saric and Cameron Johnson. Cameron Johnson's not going to be a starter on this team. They still have a lot of other young guys, especially Josh Jackson, who is also a guy who's a jump shot away. So you're adding a wing, you're adding a potential role player, rotation guy. I like his game. I like what he brings. I don't know if Phoenix is going to be the right fit for him. It's possible, though, that he clicks with some of their other young guys and things happen. But I'm just surprised that Phoenix is you think about that team, they need a point guard.
Yeah. I don't know where they're going to get that. Maybe they think they can get someone like D'Angelo Russell in the free agency market, or Ricky Rubio, I think, is out there in the free agency market. There are some people like that you could pick up. Maybe even someone a little cheaper like Patrick Beverley, but I think Beverley would rather sign with someone like the Lakers, who can actually make a deeper playoff run. You talk about reaches there for that pick. Cameron Johnson's on the last page of our research we've done here.
Yeah, and this it's a little bit out of order. I was putting some notes together for me and Jackson and pulling it from a couple different sites. But late first round, and early second round were three of the mock drafts that stood out to me for Cameron Johnson. The other thing about him in terms of how he'll fit, he's already 23. He's a 5-year college player. Wow. Very standard, or not standard, but a very typical UNC guy. Where you think about their rivals from just down Tobacco Road, and Duke has been built on the backs of one and dones. UNC is really the complete opposite. A lot of the best players to come through there, and what's made their team successful is guys who've been there for years and years and years. Cameron Johnson, his biggest NBA comparison that I saw come up across multiple sites was Justin Jackson, who's another UNC guy, another guy who was there for a few years, is a kind of a glue guy, 3-and-D, not a superstar. But again, we're at the part of the draft now where if you're drafting for a superstar, you're probably more likely to swing and miss. And a team, even at 11, might think, okay, let's try to get a guy who might never be a starter, but if he's going to be a key contributor to our team for the next decade or so, we win this pick.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's the kind of guy who could come in. We've seen the Spurs draft players like this, come in for 12 minutes a game, hit 3 threes, and really make a difference. It's a spark off the bench. Cameron Johnson kind of seems to be that kind of person. The lights-out shooter, like you said. I think another comparison was Jonas Jerebko, who we saw make some big shots in the playoffs here for the Golden State Warriors. So you're looking for players like that here as you get to these kind of middling rounds. We're still in the lottery, though, so it's interesting that you see a team like this swing on a player who they could have waited a little bit on, maybe see if he drops a little bit and make a trade for him then, if that's the guy you kind of want. It sounded like, I think ESPN's Adrian Wojnarowski had reported that this Phoenix team has been scouting him since college, went to on campus to visit him, multiple times talking to him. So it's a guy they must have really liked. Yeah,
that's usually a good sign because the longer you spend with a guy in terms of either getting a feel for his game or talking to him, the more I think secure you are in knowing that he's a fit for what you're trying to do. And I think what ends up happening in a lot of these mid-round draft picks, why they end up being unsuccessful at times, is when a team sort of has a guy who they didn't think was going to be available starts to fall in their lap a little bit, and maybe they haven't done as much due diligence on him as they could have. Maybe he didn't come in for an individual workout with the team. Maybe they haven't interviewed him. Maybe they haven't scouted his tape as thoroughly as they have guys who they thought were going to be really in their target range. So, your eyes get wide, and you're like, oh, I recognize that name. Let me go out and get him. And he ends up not being a fit for your team, and gets the bust label, or he ends up getting moved on. And moves to another team, and it's just because of the fit.
Yeah, you've seen some players recently get labeled a bust way too quickly. If you talk about like Markelle Fultz, it's still early on. We'll see. D'Angelo Russell is a guy who was labeled a bust after his first year in the league. Second year in the league, was sent off to the Nets. He was an all-star this year. So it always takes some time, with these players, if you don't know anything about them, to find a fit or things like that. I think the Spurs have gotten lucky in the last couple of drafts. They've taken players they didn't get the chance to scout or meet with or work out. I'm sure they scouted them. They didn't get a chance to meet or work out with them in terms of, you talk about DeJounte Murray, you talk about Lonnie Walker, these guys who were projected as lottery picks. So the Spurs are like, we're picking late in the draft. We're not going to reach these guys. They fall to them, they take them. But I think the Spurs are an organization where they can work some things out. They've got such a chemistry and such an identity that these players either admire it or they conform to it. And the team works on that. So it looks like Charlotte is picking P.J. Washington from Kentucky, a power forward there. Charlotte's a team, depending on how the free agency goes, Kemba Walker, their star player, on the market.
That's the biggest question. He's the face of that franchise. He's been the face of that franchise, and they're willing to pay him a lot of money to remain the face of that franchise. And if he leaves, that's going to be a team that really is looking for direction, because who else is on that team at that point? You have some other guys who aren't as young anymore in Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Frank Kaminsky are two of the first names that come to mind.
They've busted on a few. I hate to say busted, but they've had a few picks that kind of haven't really played out, like Malik Monk.
Yeah. Jeremy Lamb is on that team. I don't think he wasn't drafted by them, but he's on that team, and they're there, and they have some young guys. But I think without Kemba Walker, they wouldn't really have an identity. That's what makes this a very interesting pick to me, because this is another guy who I think the label on him is kind of a lower ceiling, higher floor, glue guy, potential to come in and be an immediate contributor. And that's for a Charlotte team that I think needs that. They had playoff aspirations this year that weren't met, and now I think it made it a little bit harder for them to potentially pitch to Kemba Walker, say he can look at it and say, where is this team? Where are they going? But now you're looking at these late lottery. This is the second to last lottery pick. The Heat at 14, or the third to last. The Heat picking next at 13 will be the second to last lottery pick.
And then Boston, I think, wraps it up.
Right.
In the lottery, yeah.
And they're picking these guys that aren't swing for the fence guys, which means that some of these high risk, high reward guys who you might have seen in these early teens, high 10s, early teens, they're going to slip to later and later in the first round to teams that are, by definition, better. Then you look at the Spurs sitting there at 19. You start to do some process of elimination. There might be some real players who filter down, whereas you thought, okay, well maybe some of these teams, the Charlottes, the Miamis of the world, who are on the outside of the playoffs looking in, maybe lacking a little bit of identity, maybe swing for the fences on a high upside guy. I'm surprised that one of these teams maybe hasn't taken a guy like Bol. That's a guy who I think is the ultimate home run still left on the board. There's a ton of questions about him, but where he was a year ago, coming out of high school as a top 5 guy, if he didn't get injured, we would have a full year of tape on him as a 7'2" shot blocker, stretch 5. I'm surprised. Most mocks are pretty rational. Because they're being written by people who don't have an allegiance to any one particular team, and they have him late first, possibly even slipping to the end of the first round.
Yeah, he's a player that feels built for this future of the NBA, the way we're going, where everyone needs to be able to shoot threes. He's a guy who's got the length, who could develop some defensive skills. If you're the Spurs, you see some of the players that they're interested in, like Sekou Doumbouya still around. You still got Bol around. They might be picking up the phone here, calling the Heat. They might be calling some of these players just a few draft picks up above them to try to find that guy that they want. They're notorious for letting these guys slip to them and making the best of those situations. It was the Miami Heat are on the clock here. So we're approaching the end of the lottery here. I think, like you're saying, these are teams that did enough to get into the playoffs. Like you're talking about Charlotte. They were right there on the cusp of a playoff. It's kind of hurts them then if Kemba Walker wants to leave. This isn't a pick, I think, that you can start a rebuild. This isn't the foundation of a rebuild kind of thing here. It's an interesting situation for them to say the least if Kemba does walk. There is kind of consideration that I think he said he'd be willing to take lesser money to stay in Charlotte. Again, people say things all the time. It was October of last year that Kyrie Irving was saying he wants to come back to the Celtics, and we see how that played out. Let's see. It looks like Miami, according to Wojnarowski, is interested in a UNC player, Tyler Herro, I believe.
I think it's Herro. I think he's from Kentucky.
Kentucky, that's right.
Kentucky. Great shooter. Great shooter, which is I think one of the areas that Miami was lacking this year. They have a lot of athleticism on that team, a lot of length, but that sort of perimeter shot maker, that is a great fit. Assuming that's the guy they end up going with, and I love following Adrian Wojnarowski because he can't say that's what they're going to pick, but the tweet was they are focused on Herro.
He's part of the draft coverage here for ESPN, so he's not spoiling anything for that coverage. As the pick is made, they'll lock that in there. Miami is a team that since the Big Three era ended there, they've always been in the thick of it. With kind of these role players, and almost in a Spursian way. They're not going out and trying to make a big splash. They're sticking with the draft. They've built a great team. They've a front office there that's proven themselves to go out and find these players, to find these kind of smaller names, these outcasts to put along with some younger role players that they've been taking here. Again, so if Tyler Herro's the guy they bring in, like you said, shot blocking 4 kind of player there, fits in, athletic kind of player there. That's a team that, again, if we're seeing some of these teams that were in playoff contention, like the Pistons or the Hornets, kind of fall off there, maybe the Heat, as I mentioned, maybe the Hawks are kind of those teams that can fill in as well.
Yeah, I'm looking at Miami's payroll right now, and you wonder why you haven't heard their names as a free agent. They are in salary cap hell.
Oh my gosh!
So
are they still paying Chris Bosh?
I don't.
I think
so.
He's cleared the books.
He's cleared the books as of the end of this season now. Cool. But Hassan Whiteside has a player option for $27 million. He's taking that. He's not going to get that in the open market. They traded for Ryan Anderson, who's on that team, $15.6 million.
Yeah, he still has that.
He's on the last year of his contract. Goran Dragic is on the books for $19 million. This is the last year of his deal. James Johnson still has 2 more years at $15+ million a year. Kelly Olynyk is still on the books for $11 or $12 million for the next year or 2. Dion Waiters at $12 million this year, $12.5 million for the 2020-2021 season. Josh Richardson at $10 million, Justice Winslow at $13 million, Bam Adebayo at $3 million, and Derek Jones, who's partially guaranteed. But they're way over the cap, and they have a ton of roster spots still to fill.
Yeah.
And there are not really many good shot-creating guards on this roster, and that's where Tyler Herro comes in.
I think of that list of players you named there, maybe Whiteside is the only one who's shown any sort of all-star level talent. Dragic is getting a little older, but during his prime, he was kind of in that kind of position as maybe he's a top 8, top 10 point guard in the league. So that's a team that's kind of locked into a lot of just all right players.
Yeah, there's got to be a move there for somewhere, and what they might have to do is give up a pick somewhere to unload some salary somewhere, get off a contract, and see if they can create enough space to get something. Go after somebody. Just otherwise, you're filling out that roster with minimum veterans or second-round picks. Really in a tough spot with not a lot of upwards mobility. As Tyler Herro, the guy,
shooting guard from Kentucky.
Yeah, the comps for him right away are all shooters. Devin Booker, but usually with a modifier. I heard low-calorie Devin Booker, or Devin Booker without some of the bad shots, perhaps. To put it a little bit more bluntly.
Efficient Devin.
Yeah, Joe Harris, who won the three-point shooting contest, is another comparison. And also a guy like C.J. Miles or Courtney Lee. All guys who you think of, what is their number one skill? Shooting the basketball. I'm surprised in this draft that there are not more guys, just from this is 2019, what is the NBA skill that is valued? It's shooting. I'm a little bit surprised that coming out of the college ranks in 2019, there of the 30, 35, 40 best guys, there aren't more guys that you think of as good shooters.
So now that this pick is in, Boston's on the clock. That's going to kind of wrap up the lottery here. The Spurs are inching closer to that draft, and there's a lot of solid players left in this. And we've talked a little bit about what we think the Spurs need in terms of building this team out. Very guard heavy, if you look at their roster. That's just putting it lightly.
Putting it very mildly.
And so they've got kind of a whole lot that we've mentioned at center, maybe someone to put alongside LaMarcus Aldridge. That's why you're saying things like Bol, the foreign center, a couple foreign centers have been linked to them. It's like Bruno Fernando, Sekou Doumbouya is a forward from France who could play alongside him. A lot of these players, the Spurs, Goga Bitadze was another guy that maybe they'd mentioned trading up to get, and looks like that guy might end up falling to them there. So there's a lot of options here for the Spurs, and we'll see what plays out in front of them here in the next 5 picks or so.
Yeah, I think at this point you're not going to see the Spurs trade up because it looks like Boston has a sense of who they might want at 14. They've had to scout so thoroughly because of the number of picks they have. So they've sort of been prepared for any eventuality. I don't see the Spurs trading to this spot. And then just looking further down, it doesn't really make a ton of sense to go up from 19 to get to 15. So you think about it and you just say, all right, well, 15, 16, 17, you kind of, if you have a guy in mind and you're really sold on him, it might just be the better strategy to just cross your fingers, hopes he falls in your lap, rather than make a trade that gives up too much for a guy who you might have been able to get anyway. I think it would be different if there was a clear, if you get to 16 and the guy you want is the clear best guy, and the team that is picking there doesn't have a need for that particular guy, then you get on the phone. You say, we need this guy. What do you need? What can we give you? How can we make this work? Short of that, yeah, I think the move for the Spurs at this point is to kind of sit and wait, which, for us, kind of get a little disappointing.
We're sitting and waiting too.
Oh, breaking news!
Exactly.
But that's not, and for people who follow this work, that's not surprising.
Yeah, looking at the Spurs roster, the way it's constructed, we mentioned guard heavy. They've got a couple of big contracts here in Patty Mills. Rudy Gay is a free agent with a player option. It sounds like he wants to come back to the Spurs, which means there's only a couple of roster spots remaining. Now, these first-round picks, if they draft them, if they're not a draft and stash guy who can play in Europe for a couple of years, that means that's a guaranteed spot coming to the Spurs here. There's been a lot of rumors and linkings to the Spurs trying to trade one of these picks for a veteran, and I think it's because Popovich doesn't like to play rookies, and right now we need some contributors with those last couple of roster spots. I could see them maybe taking that 29th pick and trading back into the second round, get a guy who's not guaranteed. I don't think they really want 2 first-round draft picks here on the thing. That's kind of a bummer to me because I think this is a team, we've talked about it a little bit on the podcast. If you've been following around, you know this is kind of our stance. Probably not winning a championship this year.
There are a lot of things that need to go right. Not to say they couldn't happen, but I think that we saw this year the ceiling for this team as it was constructed this year was nowhere near where the championship teams ended up being, the final 3 or 4 competitors.
Exactly. And I mean, the West is a little bit more wide open this year thanks to, not thanks to, but in part because Durant's injured, Thompson's injured. Who knows what's happening with the Lakers this year. So maybe this is a time when the Spurs make a run. I would like to start them thinking about the next kind of round of next generation of this team, next iteration this team can put together here. Something you don't really want to do when Pop's kind of winding down in his career. But they've got a player in DeJounte Murray whom they love, whom has shown flashes here, is working his way. He's still 21, just turned 21, still working his way into being an all-star caliber player. If you've got 2 first-round picks, this might be a time to pick up 2 role players who can grow alongside Murray, who when Murray enters his prime in 3 years, that's 3 years these guys have in the league, working with him there, and that's how you build a core. So maybe, if they were thinking about the future, they take these 2 picks, they draft some guys they can build with. But yeah, they're not, obviously this is a team that still wants to contend with DeMar DeRozan, with LaMarcus Aldridge, and with Coach Pop.
Yeah, you mentioned potentially trading 29 back into the second round. That means whoever's taking 29, they're guaranteeing that roster spot to that guy. And in this draft in particular, where there are some fuzzy lines, really we talked about, there's a pretty big drop-off after 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Then there's a sort of a middle class with guys, I would say, I'm just throwing these numbers out there, maybe 8 to 23, 24. But then beyond that, there's another real drop-off where you get the last 2 picks of the first round this year. Kind of, it hurts you in a way that if you're a competitive team, which is these playoff teams are when you're picking at this point in the draft, you want to make sure you're getting production out of roster spots that you have, and a guy you don't have as much patience for a project. You can't. There's not as much flexibility to say, here's a guy who we're going to mostly put him in the G League, let him get some reps, and we're just going to have to that roster spot. We can't go get somebody else. Now remember, there's 15 roster spots, and the NBA is pretty flexible. The rules have adapted over the last few years, where if you get really injured, some of your top guys go down to injury, you can start adding extra roster spots to 16, 17, etc. when you have a certain number of guys who are injured and can't play. But small nicks and bruises, the grind of an 82-game season, depending on where your team is in terms of what seed you're in and how hard you feel like you need to fight to get home court or so on and so forth. You want to start getting some of these guys reps, but if you're picking a guy at 28, 29 who's not ready to play in the NBA right now, it's almost hard to sell it to somebody.
It's got to be a team, I think, if you're looking for a trade partner for that spot. It's got to be a guy who saw someone they valued as maybe a top 15 talent, someone they really liked, falling, and you say, I want to jump and make sure I get that guy before he falls in the second round.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens. It looks like the Celtics pick us in at shooting guard Romeo Langford from Indiana. The Celtics, I think, are a team with another, thought it was going one direction this time last year. Suddenly, Kyrie Irving's on the way out. There's been reports Al Horford might be on the way out. Does Romeo Langford fit into kind of a rebuild, or what?
That's a really interesting pick. Here's a guy that, we talked about guys who, Bol was one. Mm-hmm. If you were drafting guys coming out of high school, Langford would have been a top 5 pick. Mm-hmm. He was considered that good of a prospect. It was huge for Indiana to get him because Indiana, they have the history, but recently they have not been a program that's really gotten a ton of top guys. They've had a fair share, but they're not. You're not usually getting top 5, top 6, superstar potential guys. And coming out of high school, Romeo Langford was that guy. Yeah. His year at Indiana didn't go so well.
Played with a torn ligament in his thumb.
I believe so, yeah. There were some questions about his work ethic and where he fit as a teammate and things that happen when you're 18 years old and you're playing with, playing in a tough conference, playing with an injury, playing with some older guys at times, and coming in with the expectations you're going to come in and lead these guys who they thought they were probably going to be the leaders. These other guys thought they were going to be leading the team, and now it's this guy's team. Very talented, but there's a lot of questions about him. It makes sense for Boston. They have so much young talent that they can afford to swing for the fences with this pick. This is a pick, by the way, that they got in that Markelle Fultz, Jason Tatum draft trade 2 years ago, where the Celtics had the number 1 pick, traded down to 3 to be able to pick Jason Tatum instead of Markelle Fultz, and in the process got the Kings pick, which everyone thought, this is going to be a great pick. The Kings are so bad.
Suddenly the Kings were good.
The Kings were almost a playoff team this year. This is that last pick outside the playoffs. The Kings had the best record of non-playoff teams. So that's this pick. That's where the Celtics picking here at 14. And another project to add to a list of Celtics players who are projects. And to me, if they are going to lean into a rebuild, sure, play him. Why not? On the other hand, he's an asset. He's a guy who you could very easily trade to another team who's looking for more young talent. Maybe it's something that happens midway through the season. He's not going to be getting off the end of the bench, spend some time in the G League. You find a team and a trade partner that has a veteran who you're looking at a team that maybe isn't contending. They want to trade that veteran, and they're willing to take on a young guy in a project, and now you have an asset. And that's sort of what you think about when you talk about asset accumulation. And that was one of the problems the Sixers ran into in the process, and why it maybe took longer than some people expected, was that assets stop being assets once they turn into players. Suddenly they're players, and suddenly those players are taking up a roster spot, they're taking up salary space, and then after 2, 3, 4 years, you start to pay them beyond what the rookie scale is. You start to paying them, real money, so to speak. That's why, in some ways, future draft picks are always so exciting. That was, for a lot of Celtics fans, the Kings pick was this wonderful concept, because the Kings, the 2019 Kings, no one knew what they were going to be. No one knew what was, where that pick was going to end up. But now here it is. It's the 14th pick, and now it's Romeo Langford.
Yeah, suddenly De'Aaron Fox became a cornerstone to a rebuilding franchise.
Things like that happen, and that's part of, and that's kind of the dark side when going back further in Celtics history to when they made that Nets trade. The thought wasn't so much about the Nets picks, because we're getting, if you're a Nets fan, we're getting KG and Paul Pierce.
Yeah, these are 2 All-Stars, Hall of Fame caliber players.
We're contending. We're this, who cares about these future picks? We've got these guys. But those picks, they come due at some point, and those Brooklyn picks turned into quite a few guys. Jason Tatum, one of them, Jaylen Brown, and then Colin Sexton, who was moved to Cleveland as part of the trade with Isaiah Thomas. Yeah,
so he was an instrumental pick in bringing Kyrie Irving to that team. These players are kind of like, buying that shiny new Porsche. As soon as you drive it out the lot, value drops there, especially if they don't perform to the level that you expect. We're out of the lottery, which means, we're into that second round. These are playoff teams looking for pieces to either make a further playoff run or to supplement something, or maybe they're a team that was a playoff team, may not be a playoff team, so this is a player that could end up being in a rebuild. Now, we've seen the 14 picks go. Was there anyone you didn't see drafted that you thought would go in that 14?
That's a good question.
I'll let you think about it because I've got one real quick. Brandon Clark was a guy who'd been touted as, he could even be a top 10 pick. There were some draft boards that had him in the top 5, which is a little wild. But I think that goes back to people valuing shooting, I think. He's not a guy who like some of these guys, like Tyler Herro, some of these guys who were sharp shooters. That wasn't Brandon Clark. But, yeah, so maybe he's one of the first people picked here as we get to the end of 20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another guy who I think was another swing for the fence kind of guy, but definitely had lottery talent, was Kevin Porter Jr. out of USC, one and done, who was drawing comparisons to James Harden, J.R. Smith, and then Nick Young a little bit.
You kind of hope for the Harden of
right,
the three.
Yes. But, saw clips of him. He was on SportsCenter the other day showing off. He has a Harden-esque step back. He has that move down. And, I mean, we're going to see it more. It's been out there. You have kids who are coming up now through high school, college, and now coming into the NBA, watching the James Harden step back and practicing it. And you're going to start seeing that move more and more. That's a guy who I'm surprised is kind of still out there on the board. But yeah, looking ahead. So Detroit on the clock right now. They're about to put in their pick. Then Orlando, New Orleans. Then there's one more pick and then the Spurs.
That's it. Do you have the picks pulled up on your phone? Do you want to recap where we are so far?
Let's see. So we can start all the way.
We know the top 3. The top 3 have been kind of set in stone for days almost. Zion Williamson, of course, going to the Pelicans. John Morant to the Grizzlies. R.J. Barrett to the Knicks. And then you had that Atlanta Hawks trade switching with the Pelicans there for that number 4 pick.
Yeah, recapping. So, that was DeAndre Hunter at number 4, power forward from Virginia. Darius Garland went 5 to Cleveland. Jarrett Culver went 6 to Minnesota. That was with a trade with Phoenix.
They sent Darius Garland.
Yeah, so that was Minnesota getting rid of Darius Garland to move up from 11 to 6 to pick Jarrett Culver there. Kobe White, the best hair in the NBA draft, point guard from North Carolina. They list him as a shooting guard here on ESPN, but he's going to the Bulls. Jackson Hayes, the center from Texas, joining Zion Williamson in New Orleans. That was also part of a trade that was going to be Atlanta's pick at 8.
That's right.
So he is now going to be with the Pelicans. Rui Hachimura at 9, Cam Reddish at 10, Cameron Johnson at 11. That was Minnesota picking for Phoenix, so that the back half of that trade. P.J. Washington from Kentucky at 12 to Charlotte. Tyler Herro from Kentucky, so back-to-back Kentucky guys. He went to Miami. Romeo Langford at 14, and now at 15, the Detroit Pistons just picked up Sekou Doumbouya. A little disappointing for Spurs fans.
I think so. He was a player that the Spurs even kind of mentioned coming up and drafting. He's a French power forward, which means the Spurs have a French connection, if you will. Kind of might maybe known a little bit about him. He's a guy who gets comped to players like Pascal Siakam, and if you're the Pistons and this guy turns into be a Pascal Siakam, that's a great thing for you. You've got a couple aging players, Blake Griffin there, who kind of led them to led the Pistons there. You put a player like Sekou Doumbouya on that team. That's a guy who could immediately jumpstart a rebuild or contribute to a playoff team.
I think it's probably more of the former. He's extremely raw. They're showing highlights right now of him playing at age 15. He picked up the game of basketball at the age of 12.
Wow.
So he's 19 right now. He's already has an NBA body at 6'9". Or actually, he's not even 19 yet. He's still 18. He's the youngest player in the draft.
Wow.
Doesn't turn 19 until December. So think about that. He's going to be, assuming he's still in the league after 4 years, he'll be getting his second contract at 22.
Jeez.
Where he'd be eligible for beyond the rookie scale of what's essentially in the 2, 3, 4, 5 million a year range, where he could start going bigger than that at 22. There are guys who've been drafted, who are still waiting to be drafted, who are older than that already in this same draft.
This could end up being a potential steal of the draft. You were showing the highlights here, so a little biased, but he's already got a good outside shot. He's a slasher, good rebounder. This is a Pistons team that has kind of been known for its physicality, similar to the Grizzlies here, and he seems to be a guy that they could kind of build a future around. As you said, he's young, so. The book hasn't been written on him yet, so there's plenty to be seen here from Sekou Doumbouya. And now the Magic are on the clock.
Magic were a surprise playoff team for me. They will be in an interesting spot. They have some redundancies, especially at center. That's the position I'm really interested to see what they do. Nikola Vucevic has been kind of the cornerstone of that franchise, maybe quietly. Maybe Aaron Gordon has been the face of that franchise, but Nikola Vucevic has been the guy. But he's a free agent this summer, and they drafted Mo Bamba last summer, and we didn't see much of Bamba in the past year. They've had so many top 5, top 6, 7 picks. Jonathan Isaac, another guy who's kind of due. So I'm thinking what the Magic are going to do, rather than re-up with Nikola Vucevic, I think you need to let the young guys play a little bit. Maybe you take a step back and step back out of the playoffs. They had the largest win increase in the NBA from 2 seasons ago to last year. They won 17 more games and made the playoffs. But I just don't think the ceiling is that high. You saw them, they took 1 game from Toronto, eventual champion Toronto, but that was a game where DJ Augustine was kind of the best player on the floor, and that is not going to be a recipe for success in the long term.
Oh yeah, I mean, this Magic team, you're mentioning a lot of redundancies there, but there's still a lot to say about getting these young guys some playoff reps, give them some playoff experience. They of course traded for Markelle Fultz as well, who's another young guy. I mean, that's a top 3 caliber talent there coming to this roster who could make a splash, kind of help them in a rebuild here if they do let Vucevic kind of walk and take some time to let these young players develop. That's a situation that would really benefit Markelle Fultz, a player who has had a few hiccups transitioning into the NBA. Hasn't really been the player that we've expected here. They've been a team also mentioned in a couple of trades here. They do have a lot of depth at center. If they are going to try to bring Vucevic back, maybe they move one of those other guys. Maybe it's time to move Aaron Gordon on that team. Who knows? I mean, a lot of these teams that have kind of been dwindling between playoffs, out of the playoffs, there's a few directions they can move here.
Yeah, Aaron Gordon is going to be tough to move. He's on, it looks like, the start of a new contract, or he's 23 and he's under contract through the 2021-22 season.
Wow.
So still 3 years left on the deal, but on a declining deal. So $19 million next year, $18 million the following year, and then just $16 million in 21-22.
You don't see declining deals very often.
Yeah, very team-friendly is what you would call that. Evan Fournier is under contract for next season and has a player option for 2021. And then they're still paying Timothy Mozgov this upcoming year.
Jeez.
That is, I had forgotten.
That's some Mozgov money there.
That was that big summer of 2016.
Salary cap jumped, and all of a sudden Mozgov is making $24 million or so.
Yeah, he's under contract for 16.7, and that is dead money. But he's expiring for them at this point. Nikola Vucevic is a free agent this summer. Terrence Ross is a free agent this summer. He was sort of an important player off their bench. Markelle Fultz is on the second to last year of his deal. There's a team option for his final year in 2021, and might see Orlando decline that if they're not happy with where he's at. It's a $12 million salary for the final year of a number 1 picks 4-year deal.
So the Magic have taken power forward Chuma Okeke from Auburn. A little interesting here. We just talked about some of the depth they have at the front court positions here. There's another power forward. I don't think he's a player who jumps right in. Of course, he got injured during the NCAA tournament, so there still is some kind of development there in terms of rehabbing and returning to the league. I believe tore his ACL in the Sweet 16, so that's March. That's about a 6 to 8 month at best return. So he's a guy who may be returning towards the end of the year. So it's a player they probably are expecting to develop a bit.
Yeah, and I think that makes some sense. They're going to have some cap room, and I think they'll be looking at some guards in free agency. I think they're really hoping for a lot from Markelle Fultz as I continue to look at this roster. Jonathan Isaac, Mo Bamba as the 2 most recent. They're 21-year-olds. Okeke, he was a sophomore in Auburn, so same thing. You're going to be looking at another 20-year-old guy on a fairly young team, but with a handful of guys who are getting up there, including DJ Augustine, who's on the last year of his deal. They only have, by the looks of it, 7 guys going into next season, so they have a lot of holes to fill. And ESPN, I think, was pretty high on Okeke.
Yeah, they had him ranked in the top 10, which is interesting. I didn't see him ranked that high anywhere else. I was seeing maybe 20, maybe into the first round kind of pick.
I think there were some drafts that had him going in the second round.
Wow, like in the top 40 or so.
Top 3 or 4 picks of the second round. So just because of where he is in his development and dealing with the injury, a little surprised that he came out. But again, you talk about the tournament run that he had with Auburn. These guys looking at coming out where their stock is high. and trying to cash in. And being a mid first round pick is worth a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, I think before Texas Tech, Auburn was the Cinderella story of last year's NCAA tournament. Tech, of course, makes it to the finals, so they end up being the story everyone remembers. But Auburn made a Final Four run there, and he was a big part to the regular season, a big part to those first couple of games as well. That team was known for their shooting. Okeke, I think, has a little bit of that shooting touch as well. You've got Mo Harkless written down as a player comparison. So, yeah, a lot to do there. I think Brooklyn Nets are on the clock now with the 17th pick. And this is a team that I think a lot of people have high expectations for this offseason in terms of they've got some money. They made some cap space earlier by sending Alan Crabb to the Hawks. So that's the team that people are expecting to bring in a max player. There's been some expectations. Maybe that's Kyrie Irving. They might offer Kevin Durant, who, even though he's injured, is still going to get max deals from players. So a team that made the playoffs last year but might be swinging in a different directions, letting D'Angelo Russell walk, building around a different max player.
Yeah, and this is showing up on the draft tracker as being the Pelicans pick. So I'm trying to figure out how we got. This is part of that. This was 17. This is the other half of the Atlanta trade.
That's correct. Yeah.
So this was a pick that was going to Atlanta from Brooklyn as part of a trade to get Alan Crabb off of the Nets.
He
went to Atlanta. Atlanta had those 3 top 20 picks, gave up 2 of them to move up to number 4 to get DeAndre Hunter, and New Orleans is showing the graphic right now. So DeAndre Hunter, a second-round pick this year and a second-round pick next year in exchange for the 8th pick, which is Jackson Hayes, the 17th pick this year, which is this guy coming up, the 35th pick this year, and then a protected 2020 first-round pick from Cleveland that Atlanta had and gave to New Orleans. These are fun. These when you start getting a third team involved and you're talking about 2 years worth of second-round picks, it starts getting very interesting and very deep.
It's the 6 degrees of separation here. So I've got we're going to come back to this pick here in a minute. The Spurs are only a couple of picks away. Some heartbreaking news from Wojnarowski, if you believe the Wojnarowski report. He's saying that the Pacers, who are on the clock next, are taking Goga Bitadze as their centers. Goga Bitadze, a foreign name, Goga Bitadze, as their center there, which is a player a lot of Spurs fans are kind of hoping for. A lot of he'd been linked to the Spurs, kind of a trade there. So there still are some guys there that the Spurs were interested in. It sounds like the Nets here, or the Pelicans here, are going to take Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who I think is a player that might have gone in the lottery, who might have been one of these 12, 13, 14 guys. Cousins with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was one of the breakout stars of last year's rookie class. So that's an interesting pick for them.
Yeah, as you talk about Spurs, that stings. That stings if that is going to end up being the move, just one pick ahead of where the Spurs are. Still not seeing Bol come off the board.
Maybe that's the guy then here for the Spurs here at 19.
I'm honestly a little surprised that the Pelicans didn't go for that. This is their 3rd first-round pick that they were going to be taking here at 17.
Talk about the front court of the future: Zion Williamson, Bol, Jackson Hayes. It's a lot of length.
A little bit of everything. You have the traditional center, you have the very untraditional center in Bol, and then you'd have Zion Williamson.
I wonder if teams are kind of scared by this injury then.
Oh yeah. I think there's no doubt that they've been scared by the injury. A big guy who's already not the most well built, with a foot problem. Yikes! Look at the way look at a picture of Bol and look at his knees, and you feel anxious just looking at the picture, and then so you say, okay, it's a foot. That's going to change his gait, perhaps, if he tries to push it coming back too soon. Yeah, red flags all over the place. And teams here, I mean, we're not talking about teams that are. I don't think there's really any team that's so well set up for the future that they can afford to completely whiff on a pick. Even at this point, where you're getting into the real back half of the first round, 18, 19, 20, and down to 30. You can't miss. You still have to get a guy. You still have to get value there. And so a guy who, because even though there's undoubtedly talent, because of the question marks, you can't afford the risk. You just can't. You can't do it.
Now, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, I think, is a really interesting fit in New Orleans. This is a team you'd imagine their starting guards are going to be Lonzo Ball and Drew Holiday, but this is a guy who could be a solid contributor off the bench in terms of a sharpshooter. He's got a little bit of defense. I think he can work on some defense, but I mean, if he's anything like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who came out being a great defensive player, I think this guy is going to be a great bench player. I mean, a role player. Maybe in the future he comes in and starts if they move on from Jrue Holiday in a few years. But this is a team that's looking 5 years ahead there. He's got the kind of raw talent that we expect the sharpshooter that we see kind of going around this time here. Malcolm Brogdon, I think you put Brogdon as a comp here, rookie of the year. So
it's funny because across a handful of different mock drafts, Malcolm Brogdon came up as a comp for, I would say, 10 to 20% of the players. Like suddenly everybody in this draft is Malcolm Brogdon, which any team would be happy to have a rookie of the year on their team. He's sort of become this ideal, and you talk about a guy who was a second-round pick, a guy who played in college for those extra years, wasn't a one-and-done, and has proven to be tremendously valuable to the Milwaukee Bucks and what turned into a deep playoff run for them. Yeah, Alexander Walker, other comps for him, Spencer Dinwiddie, Jordan Clarkson, slightly bigger guards. He's 6'6". He's a very, very quick release and a very good outside shooter. Averaged 3 turnovers per game, though, so maybe you want him off the ball a little bit more.
Catch and release kind of sharpshooter.
Yeah. And so the fact that he's going to New Orleans on a team that's going to be very young, going to be exciting. They're going to have their ups, they're going to have their downs, and I think it's the right fit. I think Zion Williamson, you want the ball in his hands, and he's proven to be a capable playmaker. So the fact that you might be going after some guards who maybe don't have the slickest handle, maybe aren't the best with the ball in their hands, that's okay. They do other things for you.
Yeah, you might have Zion as your point forward here. And I think, I mean, this is a team that is, I think, kind of knocking it out of the park with these picks so far. Again, a lot of value for these picks here. A team that I think everyone was already excited about because they were bringing in Zion Williamson. They were trying something new, rebuilding on the fly here and setting themselves up as a team with a lot of young talent, a lot of young assets. I like this pick a lot for them, and I think they're going to be a fun team to watch as they develop. Now here we go. Goga Bitadze is going off the board, the Georgia center, to the Pacers with the 18th pick. Shades of Yusuf Nurkic in there. I think he kind of has some good passing ability similar to Jokic as well. Not the vision of Jokic, but a great passing big man for the Pacers. Makes you kind of wondering what they're doing Miles Turner then, who they drafted a few years ago from Texas as their center of the future.
Yeah, overlapping skill set. I think they're both very skilled offensively. They do big things on the offensive end, but have some trouble defending on the perimeter. You definitely can't play the two of them together at the same time, and some questions about whether they can really extend their range to 3. So Spurs fans probably maybe wanted this guy. I think there were some definite questions about him. He's only 19 years old. He's had a reputation for being a bit of a hothead sometimes and maybe showing too much emotion at times. So that's maybe not the best fit for the Spurs, and you're okay with him not being there.
Yeah.
But probably in a lot of estimations, the most talented big man on the draft board, and the fact that he comes off the board just one pick before the Spurs. Frustrating.
I think it's frustrating for Spurs fan. For the Spurs team, there was another foreign player they really had their eye on, and Luka Samanic. They brought him in for a workout as well. It sounds like that might be the guy they go with. Wojnarowski is reporting that's the pick they take is Luka Samanic here with this 19th pick on the clock. Of course, they're still on the clock. That's not locked in. But looking forward towards Luka Samanic, he's a 19-year-old power forward. I think he's a player that might be a draft and stash.
That's huge. I think there were some projections that had him falling all the way to 29. However, if you're the Spurs and you don't want to use 2 roster spots on rookies this year, assuming you re-sign Rudy Gay, we mentioned it before, we'll say it again, Spurs, if they re-sign Rudy Gay and use both of their roster spots on rookies who came over this year, they would only have 1 roster spot left without having to move somebody else, whether that was Marco Bellinelli, Bryn Forbes, whether you're releasing them, waiving them, or trading them without getting a player back. If you wanted Samanic, get him now, and then whatever falls to you at 29, you deal with that moving forward. I think it's an interesting move for the Spurs because they already have a guy who they've drafted and have been stashing since 2015 in Militinov.
Yeah. We've seen a few of these, Livio John Charles, a few of these foreign players, especially as they were in the midst of championship runs here. and finishing up the Duncan era. They really went for those draft and stash kind of players. Haven't brought a few of them over. We've seen Davis Bertans really make a solid contribution here on the team. Samanic kind of reminds me of a Bertans kind of style, a sharp-shooting power forward. I think Bertans has a lot of plays with a lot of anger.
Yeah.
I think he plays with a lot of ferocity. I don't know if Samanic has that yet, but he's a guy who fits into kind of that mold that the Spurs look for in terms of those guys.
Yeah, the comparisons for him, interesting. One of the first ones that came up was Donatas Montejunas, who the Spurs had on their roster at the end of this season.
We're very high on him as well.
Yeah, and that might have just been the situation where they brought him in too late, and he couldn't really get acclimated to the system. He'd been playing overseas.
There were some visa issues. They wanted to bring him in weeks earlier.
Yeah, they had opened up the spot with Pau Gasol, bring in Montejunas. He didn't come off the bench, I don't think, at all in the playoff series, and you wonder what if. I mean, they lost the series, so you think it couldn't have been any worse, but they did end up pushing it to 7 games, and could he have swung a game? Might have swung a game the wrong way if they ended up winning, so you never know. Other comparisons, Nikola Mirotic, and then maybe worst case scenario was a guy like Jan Vesely, who doesn't come over and makes much of a change. Talented combo forward. There are some questions about his motor at times. That's one of the things that kept coming up with Samanic. He might not ever actually be a plus defender. That's kind of the thing. Some scouts are saying his ceiling might just be acceptable defensively, and he has the word soft attached to him in a lot of scouting reports. He can score in the post, he can stretch the floor. A very modern forward, and in some ways a very typical European forward. 6'11", though. You can't teach the size. You can't really you can't teach the touch around the basket. And decent passing, not the greatest playmaker, but you're not expecting that out of a 6'11" forward.
Especially for the Spurs, they're not one to they like to drop it in to the forward there, especially if it's a sharp shooting sport. You want a catch and release kind of guy like Bertans. But Duncan, I think, had some elite passing ability, but of course Duncan is a top 10 all-time kind of player. You don't rely on Aldridge to be a ball handler. I don't think that's a team. They really rely on the point guards, the guards to kind of be the motors of these teams there. So not too worried about any sort of ball handling or playmaking decisions that he has to make here for the Spurs. All in all, I mean, it remains to be seen if he even comes over to the Spurs. So I'd imagine he joins the Summer League team here, gets some reps in with that team as well.
At 19, you definitely hope that he comes over at some point. He's a guy who I think he's only 19 right now. He definitely needs to get stronger. Pretty much everybody who's drafted at 19, their body is not the finished product. Zion Williamson's maybe is the exception.
Yeah, I mean, even Antetokounmpo, who came over as a large guy, was skin and bones. They get into the NBA style workout here, putting on the strength training as well. You see a lot of guys fill out, and maybe Samanic can do that as well. But.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm a little disappointed. I think at 19, especially the Spurs, I mean, you think for so long the Spurs were a team that was picking 25, 26, 27, and lower. Those are the kind of spots where you see a lot more draft and stash. 19, this team still has holes, and if you're thinking at 19 you're picking and not bringing a guy over, that means you're really confident in the team you have carrying over. And contract-wise, they have pretty much everyone coming back. The only free agent, Rudy Gay. So I think the Spurs know they probably, even if they had let Gay walk, they weren't quite at max salary slot kind of range, and they weren't going to be bringing in a top-tier free agent. San Antonio hasn't really been a top free agent destination other than LaMarcus Aldridge one time.
That's the one. And he had a Texas connection as well, and was playing with his hero in Tim Duncan.
Yeah. So that's kind of what you have to hope to do. It's been a formula that's worked for the Spurs for a long time. You think about some of the best players in Spurs history have been late first or second round guys who've been waiting a year or two, and then you bring them over, and then they outperform expectations. That's going to have to be what happens here.
I mean, like you said, you're kind of disappointed in the pick. Maybe he could have lasted 29. But you do get that draft and stash guy out of the way. There's a lot of talent still following in this board. We mentioned already Brandon Clark. I know you're high on Bol Bol. He is still around. There's some, guys who were expected to go in the top 10. Horton Tucker is a guy that I saw in the top 10 in some mock drafts here, still around on the board as well. Matisse Thybulle is another guy.
I love his game. The Spurs need some heart on the defensive end, and I know not having DeJounte Murray this past year really hurt, but Matisse Thybulle would be an amazing fit for the Spurs, and if he's still around at 29, I really hope that's where the move ends up going, because the Spurs offensively didn't have a problem last year. They were one of the top 3 or 4 or 5 offenses. It was on the defensive end where they sort of lacked.
Yeah, and then maybe DeJounte Murray is someone who can come back and kind of fix a lot of those problems. You plug one hole, and it kind of all connects there. But yeah, I'd like to see them bring in someone, like Tybal. I think Ty Jerome is another guy who'd be a good fit in this team. Oh, again, we're guard heavy. Maybe not Jerome in that sense, but you're talking about guys here. You're hoping for some contribution. I think there's still some moves to be made for the Spurs. They've been really talking about creating some cap space has been the word around the Spurs here, to bring in a forward like Bojan Bogdanovic to kind of fill out the roster here. Since Kawhi left, small forward has been kind of a hole. They got a lot of minutes out of Rudy Gay. They slid DeMar DeRozan to that small forward position as well.
I could see them continuing to do that this upcoming year, although as Rudy Gay continues to age, it might be harder for him to keep up with some of these modern small forwards at times. He's now in year 12 or 13 in the NBA. Definitely starts to fit the bill of a small ball 4, which helps a lot of things. But if you're doing that, then that means you're probably playing LaMarcus Aldridge at the 5, which is something that I think LaMarcus doesn't really want to do, and I think the Spurs are trying to avoid. In some ways it makes sense to go a little bit smaller, let DeRozan play the 3. You get to have 2 of those guards out there, whether it's Derek White and DeJounte Murray on the floor at the same time, or Bryn and Derek, or Patty and Marco. There's all kinds of combinations out there. But I think more naturally, Rudy Gay is the 3 and DeMar DeRozan's the 2, which means you need another big.
Yeah. I mean, we saw LaMarcus, all due respect to Aldridge, he was a guy who came into the Spurs and really transformed himself, played a lot better defense, especially last year. I mean, not last year, but 2 years ago when Murray was healthy and was an all-defensive player. Aldridge was the second piece to that defense with Kawhi out as well. We talked about Tybal being a guy to take. Unfortunately, sounds like he's going off the board. They were listening over there in Boston. But Boston is going to take Tybal with this pick, Wojnarowski is reporting, and send him to Philadelphia.
That's interesting. Philly adding another very capable wing defender. Feels like they almost have too many of them. It seems like that's the kind of move you would make if you maybe weren't so confident that Jimmy Butler was re-signing.
Exactly.
And that goes against what a lot of what we've heard is that Jimmy Butler really liked it in Philly, and Philly really was happy with what they got from him. But again, the chance to go be the guy somewhere else. And again, this is purely speculation, and there's nothing wrong. Nothing says that they couldn't have 2 guys with very similar overlapping skill sets, especially when you're talking about a Matisse Thybulle who is a younger guy who's going to need some developing, especially on a playoff team like Philadelphia, and he's probably not going to be in the rotation right away. Maybe Jimmy Butler doesn't sign the long-term deal. Maybe they will develop Thybulle and end up treating him as an asset to get something else later. You just never know.
If Butler doesn't come back and J.J. Redick doesn't come back, that means there is kind of a hole there in that combo guard forward position there, which is where Tybal kind of fits in. He's probably not starting right away, of course. No. But you think about in the future there, if Ben Simmons is your point guard and if Tybal is your shooting guard in those positions, that's some amazing defense you've got set up there for you. We talked about kind of a ceiling for Tybal being Danny Green, a floor being Tony Allen.
That's not a bad floor.
Not at all. I mean, Tony Allen was one of the greatest defenders of his generation of players, locked down Kevin Durant in a playoff series and still is kind of famous for that there. Now, in return for that, Boston is receiving picks 25, picks 33.
I think it's 24.
24 and 33?
Yeah.
All right, 24 and 33. So they're just moving a little bit back here. I think it's mainly because there is still people on the board that we thought would go earlier.
The fact that this is Boston and Philadelphia making this trade 2 years after the infamous Markelle Fultz draft, that blows my mind. Again, it's a different front office in Philadelphia. Elton Brand calling the shots now as the GM, but Danny Ainge has been pretty quiet tonight as the Celtics GM. Picked Romeo Langford at 14, now choosing to move down a few spots. That must mean that he's looking at this and saying there are enough guys, we're confident enough that a guy that we like is still going to be available at 24 instead of 20, that we're going to just be okay saying, yeah, we'll take the extra asset. And 33 in this particular draft is valuable. That's a nice pick, because what you can do with that, a second round pick, once you get beyond pick 30, they're not guaranteed a roster spot. So you can sign them to a 2-way contract.
Send them to the G League.
So the 2-way contract works. You get 45 NBA days You can be on the active NBA roster for 45 days, not games, days. And otherwise, you're a member of the G League team, and the team going to retain their rights because both the Celtics and the Sixers in this case have a G League team that's very nearby, because it's very similar to what the Spurs have with Austin. So they're closely involved with the guy's development, keeping him, and then it's a one-year contract with the two-way deal. So then you can re-examine after a year and potentially offer that guy a lot more money. So some of these guys, when you're looking at whether you'd rather be drafted at 28 or 31, 32, they'd rather be drafted in that second round because it could potentially mean more money sooner.
Mm-hmm. So Boston is sitting this pick back. They have 24. They still have 22 as well. So, I mean, they've got some picks here to work with. My guess is they saw their board, saw they could get the guy they wanted at 20 at 22. A couple extra picks then for them as well. Another trade coming up here. Oklahoma City is on the clock after this Boston Tybal pick, which is going to Philadelphia. Oklahoma City is sending this pick to Memphis.
Interesting.
Yes.
So Memphis had the 23.
Mm-hmm. So I think Memphis, there was a guy there on the board that Memphis really wanted.
Yeah, and it looks like it's Brandon Clark.
Oh, wow. Again, a guy that we thought might go earlier.
A lot of people had him as if not a top 5 talent, a top 10 talent in this draft. Now, granted, that's best available, and that's different than a mock draft, which is based more on team need. You run into a lot of different things. Bol has been, these graphics that ESPN keeps flashing says he's been one of the top 5 guys available for about an hour or so now.
He's sitting at 3 now in the best available. So.
Yeah, Kevin Porter's also right there with him.
Exactly.
These are guys who have question marks around them, but I think they're going to get drafted in the first round.
I'd imagine so. I mean, we're rapidly approaching the end of that first round.
Yeah, we're at 21 on the clock right now. So
the Spurs are 8 picks away. Fingers crossed then that Bol lasts.
That would be incredible if he lasts all the way to 29,
Yeah.
Especially if you had told me a year ago that Bol would be the 29th pick. I've been not shy about talking about the Bol hype train. I just think, especially at 29, I don't think he'll still be there. I think there are enough other teams that are in a situation where they can say, you know what, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. We tried. It's such a high upside kind of pick, and the lower you get in the first round, the lower the risk becomes.
I think there's still a player out there that I might take above Bol if I'm the Spurs, and that's Bruno Fernando.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about a big man shot blocker. I think he would play well next to LaMarcus Aldridge. I don't know if he makes it to that point. I think they might lean on Pirtle before going to Fernando in that center spot.
Yeah.
But he's a shot blocking center who I think could be an asset to a team that likes defense, likes these kind of shot blockers.
I'll talk about a guy in that same vein, which is Mafodu Kabengele from Florida State. He's a guy who led the Seminoles in scoring last year as their 6th man.
Wow.
6'10". He's the nephew of Dikembe Mutombo.
He's got that pedigree. Both he and Bol have that NBA pedigree.
So we're talking about guys who have that NBA bloodline. Kabengele, 6'10" with a 7'3" wingspan. And is just a high energy guy. Came off the bench, played a lot of spurts at Florida State, which for the Spurs I think is what you're looking for. I don't think you're not looking for a future starter at 29.
No.
If they can get one, cough cough, Derek White, cough cough, it's amazing. It's not really what you lean on, and frankly, Derek White, I think for most teams you wouldn't expect him to be a starter. It sort of was a very situational thing for the Spurs.
DeJounte Murray with that 29th pick as well, I think was a fluke. I don't think you find a guy like that very often, and of course, he was someone who was projected as a lottery pick. But yeah, I mean, the Spurs have had some history with making the most of that kind of second to last pick there in the first round. I think that gets a lot of Spurs fans overhyped about the players we take at that position. But yeah, keeping the expectations honest, I think, you're looking for a role player who can come off the bench. Might take the place of someone like Chimezie Metu if you're getting a big man. This guy might be the one who falls off the team here as you look at the way they're constructing the team as well.
Yeah. Metu, if you're talking about a guy who might not be a part of the team next year, they do have a contract for him, but you can waive or trade a guy. His salary is less than $1 million. There's plenty of teams who would take that on in exchange for a heavily protected second-round pick that really ends up never conveying. He could end up being the odd man out. I think the Spurs, the fact that he had the roster spot was a little surprising still at this point, that he had a 2-year deal for a guy who was a mid to late second-round pick last year. They developed him. I think there's still plenty of good basketball to come from him, but whether that's with the Spurs or with someone else, I think could be with someone else. But the fact that the Spurs went with Samanic as their first pick in this year's draft, and we're assuming he's going to be a stashed kind of guy, it essentially opens up another roster spot. Maybe Metu just sticks around for another year, bounces back and forth between the NBA and the G League, spends a lot of time in the G League. At the end of the year, comes up. Hopefully, there's a playoff run for the Spurs, and you'll see where you're at with him after 2 years of you're not paying him a lot of money, and didn't use a high pick on him.
Now, they're showing Brandon Clark on TV right now. You want to kind of talk about how you think he fits on this Memphis Grizzlies team as a power forward. I think more of a defensive-minded guy than we've seen some of the other kind of positions, people in his position taken so far in the draft.
Yeah, Memphis is in an interesting spot because obviously you think about that grit and grind identity they've had for so many years. They traded Mike Conley, they traded Marc Gasol, they got back Jonas Valanciunas. They're getting back some stuff from Utah, but it's really more veteran, filler, wing, guys who are going to sort of be mentors for some of these young guys.
Yeah, you're talking like Jay Crowder. Kyle Korver, and then Grayson Allen, who's technically a second-year player, but he's an older guy. Yeah, played all 4 years at Duke.
So interesting. By the sounds of things, Valanciunas is opting out of his deal with Memphis, so they might still be in need of a center. They'll have a ton of cap room by the sounds of things, but it's a really tough sell to try to get somebody to go be they're not going to get, I don't think they're going to get an A or even a B list superstar. What I think could be interesting is if they do.
Yeah.
They could throw max money at a guy who might not get the max money somewhere else. This is not based on anything, but what about like DeMarcus Cousins?
He comes. He'd immediately fill a role.
He'd fill an immediate need for them. I think in some ways it would be more beneficial for them to be bad this year. Let John Morant, Jaren Jackson, Brandon Clark get reps, get the minutes. Clark maybe a little bit less so because he's not the high lottery talent. He's the later first-round guy. But they're going to make some mistakes. They're not going to be that good, even if they bring in a guy. They have the money to bring in a guy, I think.
Yeah,
it's not going to bring in that guy.
There's quite a few teams with money to spend here, and I think that means you're going to see some players who wouldn't get the max kind of get in that kind of general area. I don't think
Tobias
Harris is a guy who probably wouldn't get the max anywhere else. I think Jimmy Butler would get the max in a typical year. Yeah. He's a player that a lot of people are high on, especially the way he performed on that 76ers. For a lot of stretches, he was the man for them. And I think, Memphis could try to throw some money at someone to kind of fill that spot. I like the Cousins idea there.
I forgot Memphis is still paying Chandler Parsons.
Yeah.
He's getting $25 million this year, and Avery Bradley is partially guaranteed for $12 million. Kyle Anderson, C.J. Miles, both on the books as well. So they don't maybe have as much. I know they took on a lot of salary to match Conley, but this projection had them still basically over the cap. So unless, and I don't know off the top of my head what Crowder plus Grayson Allen plus Kyle Korver, I think it's a lot less than Conley. So they might have a little bit of money, but they might not have enough to go get Cousins. So I might have to backtrack on that. But,
maybe Cousins just likes Memphis barbecue.
Hey, you know what? Can't blame him.
Right? All right. So looking ahead here, this is that Brandon Clark pick we saw. They're showing the Thunder. Of course, he was traded to the Grizzlies. Boston's back on the clock here with that 22nd pick. This is not the one that Philly is sending them. They've got another pick looking ahead at 24.
24, yeah.
Utah's on the clock here and a few picks as well. And now we're starting to see teams who made moderate playoff runs and looking for people who are just bench contributors, people who could come in for 8 to 10 minutes, just add fill some holes. Maybe playoff teams are losing some players and they get in there. The Brandon Clark, Sean Marion comparison, what do you think?
He's a little bit more of a power forward than Sean Marion. Maybe that has more to do with the way everyone kind of seems to shift up a position in this modern NBA, where there's just so much more of an emphasis on guards. Because the comparisons I was seeing was more Jordan Bell, Paul Millsap, even a Stromile Swift, which is like a really good throwback there. Just, super athletic. Just super athletic, bouncy. He is a little bit older for a rookie, and a guy who doesn't really have the outside shot, which is what you think about a little bit with Sean Marion, although Sean Marion, you think about his outside shot, it's not the most beautiful thing, but it went in.
Yeah, it worked.
So Brandon Clark maybe not as much, and he's another guy who I think could have been a really nice fit on the Spurs.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about adding him to a second unit. Shooting wasn't the problem for that second unit, but defense and energy and rebounding could be at times, and just starting to fill in another big body. I know Samanic probably will come over at another point. Litvinov maybe this summer. Who knows? Haven't really heard anything yet. But the Spurs, to me, we still have to wait another 5, 6 picks, 7 picks for the next Spurs pick.
Maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes away from that as well.
At least,
25,
you need a big body at some point because I think it's not going to be in the Spurs' best interest and definitely not in the Marcus Aldridge's interest to play a lot of minutes at 5.
All right, so, let's just kind of get to where we are. We're kind of through the top 20 now as we sit here. We talked about the lottery picks. A few surprises we saw in there, a few trades as well in terms of the Hawks moving up to 4 to bring in DeAndre Hunter. We saw Phoenix sending their 6th pick to the Timberwolves, correct?
Yep.
A few moves there. Anything surprise you in that 10 through 20 range?
Yeah, let me.
Let's talk about the picks. Yeah, let's run through the picks here.
Luka Samanic, it's a very Spurs pick. It still feels like a little bit of a reach. I think he probably could have still been available at 29, and the other 9 guys who go between 19 and 29, that could represent a lot of potential lost talent. Now, the Spurs scouting staff is very good at what they do, and there's a very good chance that the guy they liked at 19 will fall to them at 29 because that's just how things seem to work for the Spurs all the time. And there's plenty of talent still on the board, but it just seemed like a little bit of a reach. There were plenty of mock drafts that did not have Samanic going in the first round at all, and here the Spurs are taking him at 19.
It did sound like going into the draft a few days before, like they were really high on him. I honestly, they probably could have lasted until the 29th. Maybe they could have traded back and gotten a few more assets. I don't think they're a team that's trying to acquire assets. But yeah, that was a surprising pick. Honestly, I think there's still a lot of talent, like you said. It sounds like Boston here with this 22nd pick is going to take Grant Williams from Tennessee.
Really interesting. Here's the thing about what Boston is doing. I'm surprised we haven't heard any players anywhere get involved. All of these picks have been pretty much straight up pick swaps, trading a high pick for a slightly lower pick and a future pick, or throwing in a second round pick somewhere. Really the only guy who's moved today was Dario Saric, right?
Yeah, TJ Warren a little earlier, but that was pre-draft.
Pre-draft, yeah. And that wasn't even really picks getting involved too much, not today's picks. So the fact that we haven't seen a significant mid-draft trade that involves a current guy changing teams is surprising. And I think that speaks to the value of this year's free agency and the allure of it, that there is so much interest in trying to rebuild through free agency. A lot of teams have cap space, and there are a lot of very good free agents this summer. So the fact that teams are holding on to the guys that they have rather than letting them go and move around a little bit it's still surprising me. It seems like usually by now there's a fairly important guy who's changed teams at this point in the draft.
Yeah, and who knows, maybe there could be a trade like that in the future. Now, Grant Williams is part of a Tennessee team that I think a lot of people had expectations for going into the NCAA tournament, and they didn't live up to that expectations. So I think that probably hurts his draft stock here. I didn't see any mocks where he was going in the first round, so this might be a little bit of a reach for the Celtics. Do you have any sort of comparisons here, player comparisons for him?
Yeah, the one of the favorite ones that I saw was for Grant Williams was Spurs era Boris Diaw.
There you go.
Which is fantastic because it's very specific.
Does he come with a cappuccino machine?
I hope so. This Tennessee team is one of my favorite teams to watch in college basketball this year because they had a lot of experienced guys. Admiral Schofield, who was, I believe, a 4-year player and one of the contenders for Player of the Year. Again, Tennessee team that didn't quite live up to expectations. They had very high expectations. And this Grant Williams, as a junior, guys who'd played together for a few years. That was a team, kind of the anti-Duke, and a lot of basketball types kind of gravitate to that because there's such a pushback, sort of a counter against this one-and-done culture. I think there's always value in guys who played on good college basketball teams and played together with guys. At a certain point, you want winners.
Yeah, and he played for Rick Barnes, which is a coach who's really been able to kind of. Players who played under Barnes have thrived in the NBA.
I can think of a few.
Yes,
Russell Westbrook, Kevin Love, Darren Collison, Lukumba Mute.
The list goes on.
Yeah, there's quite a few UCLA guys.
So yeah, he might. Grant Williams might be a guy who steps in and performs well. We always see some player drafted in these final picks here with the first round who makes a jump. And I think maybe Williams, I don't think he gets the chance for this Celtics team. Honestly, it remains to be seen who's even going to be on these Celtics. They've got some players who could move, Kyrie Irving, Al Horford. Yeah, so I mean,
the Celtics just have so many young guys now. I mean, they have some guys who you think on a lot of other teams would be decent contributors. Semi Ojeleye, I think. You wonder what's going on with some of these Celtics. What you used to call assets, but now they're players. And at a certain point, there's only 48 minutes in a game and 5 guys who are playing at a time, and so many minutes to go around. These guys at a certain point are going to have to be a part of somebody's team if they're going to get that. Are they going to get that chance or no?
Yeah. You mentioned Admiral Schofield. He's a guy who my heart tells me is going to be a sleeper second-round pick. It'd be awesome to see if the Spurs, he falls to the Spurs there. Are there any players you see kind of projected for the second round that stand out to you at all? Or
Yeah, one guy who I definitely want to give a shout to because you don't get to talk about Belmont College basketball players very often is Dylan Windler. Just a knockdown shooter. And, you could say, he was doing it against weaker competition. But the three-point line is the same distance whether you're playing in the Sun Belt or the Ohio Valley or the SEC or the Pac-12. He's kind of a lower ceiling, higher floor kind of guy, 23 years old. He's a shooter. He's a guy who's going to come out, space the floor, catch and shoot, and be a weapon. And frankly, a lot of teams, when you get a lot of these bench units as they get constructed, you put together a lot of young guys, and you put them together, and suddenly the ball just kind of stops going in the basket.
Yeah.
Second units have trouble finding points, and if you have a Dylan Windler on your team, he's not going. Your second unit's not going to be wanting for points because he's you don't have to have the ball in his hands, but you're going to create spacing on the floor for the other 4 guys, and if he's open, he's going to knock it down.
I want to give a shout out to another guy who's a second-round talent. Hopefully, will be drafted. Former San Antonio High School basketball star Jordan Murphy, who played at Brennan High School, was an All-State player there. Was a Minnesota Golden Gopher in college, and actually set at the school all-time records in rebounds and double-doubles. A really productive motor for a guy who can play the 3 or the 4 position. And I think a lot of teams could use someone with that kind of skill set on the second unit. You talk about shots don't follow that second unit. Second unit stars, if second unit players can really shine through with that motor, with that kind of rebounding ability to kind of create second chances for their team there. So he's a player, be really cool. I know the Spurs brought him in for a draft, Jordan Murphy. Nice to get some local flavor here on that Spurs team as well.
Yeah, anytime you can get a local guy on your team, it becomes a fan favorite, and I think especially as a mid to late second round guy, it's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, I saw some projections, maybe like 45 to 55 in that kind of range, which is where the Spurs are picking with that second pick. So, could be a guy they bring in. Now, the Utah Jazz are on the clock. The Celtics just picked number 22. That was Grant Williams. Now, the Jazz have already kind of made a splash. They were a playoff team that everyone said they had one hole to fill, and that was point guard. And they went out and got Mike Conley. They let the bench they had a lot of bench depth last year. They sacrificed some of that depth to bring Conley in. So that means this position here, this pick here, could be a bench contributor we're talking about here, someone who can add an offensive spark or someone who could bring some rebounding in. Interesting to see what they could do with this pick here.
This is Oklahoma City's pick and not Utah's. And this is Oklahoma City from Memphis.
You know what? This is then Utah sent this pick in the Conley trade. Here we talk about the 6 degrees of trade here. And
but
again,
how did it end up in Oklahoma City's hands?
They swapped for that pick, so that they get Brandon Clark.
Right. Okay. From just a few minutes ago.
Untangling the web here.
And big picture, it doesn't seem like it's that important because it's not a big number of moves up or down. We're talking about 2 or 3 picks up or down in one way or the other. So
I guess Memphis maybe thought that the Celtics could take Brandon Clark over Grant Williams, kind of in that same position there, and they wanted to jump up there and get their guy. But yeah, looking at this Thunder team, again, this is a playoff team who I think their run ended a lot earlier than they expected. They had Russell Westbrook, who in Westbrookian terms, I would say had an off year. Still an all-star.
Triple-double.
Triple-double machine. Did not shoot well from the three-point line. And you saw for a long stretch of the season here, that Thunder team became Paul George's team. And it wasn't until Paul George got injured that they kind of fell out of that contention for a top 3 seed there. And George didn't look healthy in the playoffs. And I think a healthy George, maybe they make a deeper playoff run. What kind of piece could they add here, are you seeing?
Oklahoma City, they just need more shooting. They need shooters if you're going to keep playing Russell Westbrook ball. And, he's getting up there now. He's approaching 30, starting to get over the wrong side of 30 pretty soon. And how much longer will he be the explosive athlete that he's been famous for a decade now in the NBA? He's still going to try to do what he does.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to give him that valve to drive and kick and give him this floor spacing to do what he wants to do. So that seems to be the thing is they have guards between Westbrook and Dennis Schroeder, Andre Roberson, who doesn't fill that need.
No.
He's kind of notoriously not a shooter. But Paul George is a very versatile wing. Steven Adams has the middle lockdown. So they're a team that could go for the best guy available, assuming that's a guy who can provide some shooting or be an asset that you could flip for some shooting somewhere else.
Yeah, Robeson's a guy who is in that same vein as like Tony Allen, a lockdown defender. Just hasn't been able to get on the court, I don't think, as much as Oklahoma City would like. And maybe they go a different direction, find another guard to bring in, and maybe that's a shooter. Waiting on that pick to be locked in here. Projecting forward, then we've got Boston up next in the clock with that Philadelphia pick, and then Portland's after them here. Approaching into the first round, we've only got 5 picks until the Spurs pick now.
Yeah, a lot of good players still available for the Spurs to be looking at. And I think as more guys start to come off the board, the Spurs have to be licking their chops a little bit. I think now they got the guy that they liked clearly in Samanic that they could stash. I think you take a swing at a guy now. Maybe it's Bol. I've been kind of keeping my fingers crossed just because the potential is incredible. It's so tantalizing, and you're talking about a situation where it could be a couple of years before it really pays off, and that's the timeline the Spurs are on. And if it pays off, it's going to pay off huge. And if it doesn't pay off, well, it was the 29th pick at that point.
If the Spurs pick Bol, I think this we're going to hear a lot of energy from Cameron. Some excitement here. All throughout, from the beginning of this offseason on, as we started this podcast, he has been Bol's number 1 fan, I would say, maybe
not the number 1 fan. There's a lot of Bol fans out there.
Maybe not as big of a fan as Manute Bol, but yeah.
We are the, I think we said on Twitter, I was the conductor of the Bol hype train.
There you go, yeah.
The Bol to San Antonio hype train. So it will be departing from its station in the Barclays Center near Brooklyn and heading presumably south somewhere, whether its final destination is near the AT&T Center. Choo-choo, because I'm excited. We're getting closer to it.
You're going to be first in line to buy the Bol Spurs jersey.
That would be fun.
A name we haven't mentioned throughout this entire draft was Nasir Little.
Yeah.
Still falling here. I think this is a guy, a year ago, we mentioned Bol a year ago was projected as a top 10 pick, maybe top 5. Nasir Little coming out of high school to University of North Carolina, I think was projected to be a future star. Did not play well for North Carolina.
Yeah, a rare one and done for UNC. Mentioned earlier that unlike Duke, they're the kind of team that really really looked for guys who they knew they were going to be developing a little bit more. And that's not to say they never had one and dones. They have. But
usually those one and done guys are ones who thrive in their first year.
Right.
And that wasn't Nasir Little.
No. So it's a little bit surprising. The fact that he's still on the board is not that surprising. He has talent, though. The comps for Nasir Little include Andre Iguodala, who you think of now as being maybe a role player, but he's a former All-Star, a former franchise guy for a few years in Philadelphia and then in Denver for that 1 year. So a lot of potential there. Again, a lot of these comparisons when you see it on TV, whether you're reading it on a blog somewhere or you're watching the highlights, it's a best case.
Yeah.
Especially with 19-year-olds, because for every Andre Iguodala, there are 2 guys who come out like Nasir Little and end up somewhere else. There's just, as you read some more of these comparisons, you maybe recognize them and you maybe don't. There are some names that I have to be like, oh yeah, wow.
You end up Googling them, and trying to figure it out. So this pick coming up, was originally Philadelphia's. They sent it to Boston, who sent them back the 20th pick. This pick is on the move again. So Boston is sending this pick to Phoenix. And Phoenix is really interested in Ty Jerome, according to Adrian Wojnarowski.
Yeah.
Phoenix is a team that has been in desperate need of a point guard for a very long time. I think they've got Devin Booker, who is a ball handler, but you want him playing the two. You want him slashing. You want to find a guy who can play next to him. I wonder if Ty Jerome is that guy, is the point guard of the future in Phoenix.
He's a little bit more of a low ceiling guy. A lot of projections have him as a career backup, but it's a start for if you're Phoenix, because you could go out and play the trade market. You can go out and play the free agency game a little bit and see what you can find, knowing that you have a guy who, even though he's going to be a rookie, has been battle tested at Virginia.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a little bit of a safety blanket. I also want to go back a little bit because we skipped over the number 23 pick, who's going to Oklahoma City, and Darius Bazley.
He's a guy that I think a lot of people 2 months ago didn't expect a whole lot out of.
Not a name you recognize.
Exactly, but I think he impressed a lot of people through workouts, through interviews, and kind of rose through the draft board there. Was a New Balance intern.
Yeah, you didn't play in college. If you're wondering why that, that name is not a foreign name. Why don't I recognize that from college basketball? Princeton High School.
Yeah.
He did not play in college. Interned at New Balance, worked out for a year, and
I think got some reps with the G League. Maybe.
I think he might have.
Confusing that with someone else. Yeah, exactly. But
there's certainly, I mean, these guys all work out somewhere or another, especially in the off season. Comparisons for him, though, somewhere between Lamar Odom and Bruno Caboclo, and that is quite the range. Nicholas Batum kind of somewhere in the middle, long, shooting, which is something that Oklahoma City desperately needed.
Oh yeah.
And but very raw, and I think that's a good fit for Oklahoma City because they're trying to win now.
Exactly.
And you even though you draft a guy, he has to have the roster spot as a first-round pick. We'll probably spend most of the year in the G League, getting that experience. And a year from now, Oklahoma City will know a little bit more about them. If they fail to get out of the first round again, I think you have to make some kind of changes there.
Yeah, for sure. You might see. I mean, this is a team that kind of reinvented itself on the fly once Durant left, made a home run swing trade for Paul George, who you weren't really sure if he was going to re-sign or not. Miraculously re-signed. I think everyone was expecting him to go to the Lakers. But yeah, it didn't click. The injuries got in the way a little bit. It's hard to get Russell Westbrook, I think, to relinquish the ball, to give shots to other people. Just saying. But yeah, you're approaching the end of the Westbrook era, as we talked about. So yeah, finding these pieces that could come in and contribute in a win now, but could also maybe play a role in a future rebuild if they need to reset here. A team that's reset on the fly before, maybe they reset again.
Yeah, you want to talk about the ultimate reset on the fly. Kevin Durant walked away for nothing, and then they were still a playoff team the following year. Granted, it's because they just let Russell Westbrook do whatever he wanted to do and, average a triple-double and do what he does at the prime of his career, MVP season. But as they're showing these Ty Jerome highlights now for this Virginia team, it's amazing that it shows up as a Sixers pick going to Boston, then going to Phoenix, and we still haven't heard, I don't think, what Phoenix is sending Boston in
exactly.
return.
I'm checking here. Wojnarowski is originally the one who tweeted the trade. Did not tweet what they were going to be reciprocating there. So it'll be interesting to see what Boston gets in return for that. And as soon as they do announce it, we'll talk about that as well. But Ty Jerome to the Suns here with that 24th pick. That means Portland is on the clock as well. And Portland is a team that made a run to the conference finals. Before they ran into the Golden State Warriors buzzsaw, they were clicking on all cylinders there, even without Kevin Durant. You've got Damian Lillard, you've got CJ McCollum, you've got Yusuf Nurkic returning from injury next year. This is a team with a very bright future. And so, it might be interesting to see. They're a team that's one piece away from making another championship run. Who that piece is, I don't know. But it's not going to be someone they draft for the 25th pick.
Yeah, I'm trying to jumping back over onto Twitter really quick to try to figure out what the second half of this trade is in terms of what the Celtics getting back. But I'm seeing obviously a lot of Spurs fans on here, and some confusion and some disappointment in the Samanic pick. So I'm glad it's. I'm a little bit relieved that I'm not going to be the only guy whose first reaction is what the heck,
right?
I think it will probably pay off because the Spurs definitely know what they're doing, but the the initial reaction, seems to be more nays than yays, as Pounding the Rock puts it. Really interesting. Just again, 19 is higher than the Spurs usually pick.
Yeah, they hadn't picked. I mean, that's the closest they've come to. I guess they didn't really pick Kawhi Leonard with a 15th pick. Mm-hmm. That was a trade. You haven't seen them pick in those teens in a long time. And that comes with being a team that makes deep playoff runs, who has really, really strong regular seasons. People are saying, why'd you draft Bertans when we already have Bertans? That's a reaction I'm seeing here on Twitter. A lot of people are calling him a steal. I don't see that, but, again, it fits the need they had where they needed someone as a draft and stash kind of guy.
Yeah, someone retweeted the Luka Samanic combine highlight where it's the exercise where you get a running head start and you see how high you can reach when you get to the top of your jump. 144.5 inches, so basically he could probably dunk on a 12-foot rim.
There you go.
Again, he's a 6'11" European guy who can shoot the ball. So he's 19 years old, probably not going to be a member of the Spurs this upcoming year, which isn't a problem because the Spurs roster is pretty full. Mm-hmm. Just be patient, Spurs fans. Just be patient.
So now Portland is on the clock. It looks like they are going to draft Nasir Little, which I think fits pretty well with this team. This is a team that started Al-Farouq Aminu at the small forward position. That's a hole that in the future you're going to need to fill. Nasir Little is someone who has shown flashes of raw potential. Disappointing, and that's why he fell. But this might be a good spot for him in Portland.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what the future holds for the Portland Trailblazers. Mm-hmm. This season was a little bit of a breakthrough in the playoffs for them, where they had that big moment, Damian Lillard. They got to the conference finals. They were ahead of the Warriors in just about every game of that series. I think that really was a vindication for that Portland front office that they can build around Damian Lillard and C.J. McCollum. And you have to remember, Yusuf Nurkic was out for the playoffs.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a team that is well built for right now, and Nasir Little is a guy whose timeline is not right now. Yeah. It's kicking the can down the road a little bit. He's going to spend some time in the G League, and when he's ready in a couple years, it will be a different Trailblazers core, and the league will have a little bit of a different look. Maybe it's still the same core, but they're kind of aging out a little bit, aging down, and you need to sort of ratchet back the minutes that you're giving McCollum, Lillard, and Nurkic if it's still that big three there. And you'd hope for a guy like Little that he's ready to step in and be a contributor. But again, at this point, you're talking about 25. Yeah. You're not talking about a guy who's projected to be a starter, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's a swing. It's a little bit of a swing for the fences where the average, if you simulate his career 10 times, is probably a 7th or 8th guy, and that's fine.
That's totally fine for this kind of role. So now from Woj himself, we have the rest of that Celtics-Suns trade. The Suns are sending the Celtics a 2020 first-round pick from the Bucks.
Whoa.
It's a pick that came when the Bucks traded Eric Gordon, and when the Suns traded Eric Bledsoe.
Eric Bledsoe, yeah.
The other Eric, to Milwaukee, and for that pick.
Okay, so the Celtics now adding, in addition to, they have a heavily protected Memphis pick. I think they had the Clippers pick this year. They have they had the Kings pick this year. They have the Memphis pick next year, but it's protected, and then it's unprotected the following year. And they have Milwaukee's pick next year, which is going to be at the end of the first round because they still have this guy named Giannis.
So we're talking future assets again.
Yeah, and the Celtics might not be very good next year, or they might have cap space without Kyrie and Al Horford. Might be able to go get a free agent. That's their franchise seems like a little bit of a mess right now.
It's a franchise that a year ago you would have put up there as one of the ones with the brightest futures. You got some rising stars in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. You've got them paired against some players, some superstars players in Kyrie Irving. Al Horford, I think, is one of the more underrated players, and he could end up fetching close to a max deal this offseason. And that means they might be losing Horford. They're losing Irving. And it's a team that always has kind of been in the running as like they've got all these assets. When are they going to make their push for the win now kind of thing? To me, it seems like Kyrie Irving kind of blew that up.
Yeah, so interesting that it's the Suns and Celtics making a trade. Again, there's a little bit of a connection there between those two teams because of the Isaiah Thomas was a Sun. It wasn't. I don't think it was a direct trade. Maybe it was.
I think it was.
Yeah. I forget who the Celtics gave up to get Isaiah Thomas, but it was not much.
No.
Again, another one of those moves where The Celtics made somebody look bad a couple years ago, and now they're a trade partner again here on draft night 2019. The Sixers and now the Suns. And we'll see if Danny Ainge, in 3-4 years from now, we're saying, oh, Danny Ainge got him again, or
right?
not. It's we'll see.
He's definitely been the winner of a few trades throughout his tenure there. They're showing Nasir Little walking up to the stage here on our screen, which means Cleveland is up next with the 26th pick.
They have a lot of needs.
They do. We saw them earlier take Darius Garland from Vanderbilt.
They took Darius Garland at the 5 slot. So,
which I think we both thought might have been a win for them.
I think so. It's probably one of the best guys available at that point, if not the best guy available. Very high on a lot of people's draft boards. So I like that pick for them, and I like what the Suns have done today. A little bit unorthodox, but they moved down in the draft, which is for a team with as many shortcomings as they have, a little bit surprising. But moving down from 6 to 11, kind of reaching for Cameron Johnson, who in a lot of mocks was not even a mid-first round guy, if a first-round guy at all. They take him at 11. And then trading to get Ty Jerome. So they do fill that point guard hole. But you look at what point guards have been taken between 11 when they were picking and at 24, there really weren't
been a lot.
Yeah. The point guards came off the board early. Garland, Culver.
We're seeing a lot of 4s
John
and 5s
Morant,
in those middle picks.
Tyler Herro is kind of more of a 2 guard. Nickeil Alexander-Walker probably more of a 2 guard. Yeah. And then there are a couple of other point guards, but they're very risky, very. I think there's a lot more simulations, if you want to talk about it that way, where they kind of flame out and bust. So interesting that the Suns end up going with the safe pick there in Ty Jerome. Maybe a little bit of a reach. I think there are plenty of worlds where he falls into the second round, but they really needed a point guard. They have that late first-round pick, and they go and get him.
Talk about you like what the Suns have been doing so far. They're adding another player here to the roster, according to Shams Charania. I don't know if this is part of the same Celtics trade, but center Aaron Baines is headed to Phoenix as well from Boston. A guy who I think just re-signed with the team. Maybe it was a sign-and trade. Talk about coming back to the Celtics there.
I'm grimacing at that one because he has a pretty big. There's a corner of the internet that absolutely loves Aaron Baines. I don't know how.
Former Spur, and I think when he came over from Australia to the Spurs, there was a lot of intrigue in him as well, and I don't think he ever really clicked with us here.
It wasn't for a lack of effort, though. I've heard a lot of stories about how he would be out. I mean, this is back when Tim Duncan would be warming up, and this is end of career Tim Duncan. And Aaron Baines, as a rookie, as a young guy coming over from Australia, would be watching Tim Duncan still work out. And you're Tim Duncan. You could roll out of bed and show up to the game. Lace up your shoes 5 minutes before tip-off and go out there, and no one would really say anything because you're Tim freaking Duncan. You can do that. You've earned that. But that wasn't what Tim Duncan was doing. Tim Duncan was still going out before games at 38, 39 years old, whatever, and busting his butt, working on moves, practicing different shots, and that made a big impression on Aaron Baines as a young player. And, he wasn't getting off the bench very much. This is the 2013, 2014 kind of Spurs championship run where they were playoff time, condensing the lineup, condensing the rotation. Baines was the end of the bench, waving the towel guy, but it made an impression on him, and he started doing that and starting to follow in Tim Duncan's footsteps and saying, I'm going to get out there, even if it's before, during the shoot-around time when other guys are sitting in the locker room listening to their music, get out there and work on my move. So he's a guy who's worked really hard. He's made huge strides over the course of his career, bounced around a little bit. Boston, Detroit, San Antonio, and now apparently Phoenix. Going to back up DeAndre Ayton and provide some muscle and some toughness for a Suns team that hasn't won very much in a long time.
He was a very strong contributor to some Boston teams that didn't really meet expectations, I don't think, but not for lack of his part. I think he brings a toughness that Suns team needs if they're going to get over the hump here. And if players like we mentioned, Devin Booker, want to start winning, Baines is the kind of guy who can help bring that attitude. He's been on some winning teams here.
What's interesting to me is what that does for Boston in the big man rotation. Again, there's so much up in the air whether Al Horford ends up not re-signing with Boston, which it sounds like is going to be the case. Daniel Tace is probably the starting center there now.
Yeah.
Again, I think you start to serve the youth a little bit more.
Now, has Boston become a team that might go out and get someone like DeMarcus Cousins?
I think now you have to start thinking about that as a real possibility. It would, in a lot of ways, be a good match, a sort of a good marriage between those two, because Cousins still has a lot to prove. I don't think he proved nearly as much as he wanted to with the Warriors. I think in his mind, he signed that the mid-level exception with the Warriors and was thinking, okay, I'm going to rehab. I'm going to step in late in the season and become the piece that they need to push them to a championship. I'm going to have great games in the playoffs and just have be the X factor in a dominant playoff run for my team. Everyone's going to stay healthy. We're going to win a ring.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
No.
He got hurt at the beginning of the playoffs. His fourth career playoff game was in the NBA Finals. Like, more than half of his career playoff games have been in the NBA Finals because he spent all that time in Sacramento, all that time in New Orleans, and then got hurt early in his playoff run with Golden State. So I don't think is going to get the max contract he was hoping for when he made that move with Golden State. Now Boston's in a situation where do they fully rebuild? Do they try to go all in again and give up some more of these young? They still have a ton of young assets.
Oh yeah.
I think there's a good compromise there for both of them, where Cousins isn't maybe exactly what the Celtics want, and the Celtics aren't exactly what Cousins wants.
I feel like Cousins really needs to find a team where he can come in and score 30 points and get 15 rebounds on a bad team. And that might help his image, I think, throughout the league. I think that leads to a bigger max deal.
I'm not sure at this point in his career that's what he wants, though. He's done that for so many years, and I think there are so many teams who have seen what that does, where I don't think at this point, he's been injured a couple times. He's probably past his prime athletically. So to me, he's going to be a contributing piece on a team as maybe the second or third best guy. Second, maybe in his mind. Third, maybe more realistically. And the Celtics, I think, would be a good match.
For sure. All right, so Cleveland is just now picking with the 26th pick, and they're taking a guy you've mentioned already in this podcast, small forward Dylan Windler from Belmont, a terrific shooter.
Yeah, looking at the highlights, man, it's amazing to see some of the Ohio Valley Conference gyms making the ESPN highlight reel, because you look at this guy and physically he just doesn't look like the other guys in the first round of the draft.
Oh, yeah.
The prototypical first round draft pick is 19 years old, is 6'8" with a 7-foot wingspan, and you talk about what the scouting report on him is tremendous upside, decent enough vision, explosive leaper, still needs to develop a jump shot, and you flip that kind of on its head, and that's Dylan Windler. I
mean, he's got some golf trick shots for you. Watch this highlight reel here. They were showing some clips from him too. He's a guy who not only can catch and shoot off the dribble as well, especially shoot the three off the dribble, which I think is a skill that most people take time to build in the NBA.
Years in the NBA.
If he's entering the NBA already with that means he can be a solid contributor off the bench at the minimum. I don't know where he fits in the Cleveland rotation of, he's not going to play the 2. He'll probably play the 3 here. This is a team that's got some holes, so maybe he gets some minutes to play. Do you have a comparison here?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about Tyler Herro out of Kentucky as just Windler's the other really amazing shooter. Cameron Johnson, kind of the third from North Carolina. Those were the three amazing shooters coming out of this draft. 6'7" guard from Belmont, 23 years old already, so I think that makes him a 4 or 5 year player in college. And his best NBA comp is Bojan Bogdanovic. I think there was a mock draft that had Windler going to the Spurs, which I think is interesting because the Spurs have expressed interest in Bogdanovic. So if you can get a version of Bogdanovic, but on the rookie scale deal instead of what Bogdanovic is going to command, about $12 million.
Yeah.
Granted, Windler, I think defensively isn't quite there. Probably his body still needs some work. I think there's a difference. Even when you're talking about a guy who played 4 years in college, there's a difference between 4 years of strength training at Belmont versus 1 or 2 years of strength training at Duke or Kentucky.
Yeah, probably.
And that's not to take anything away from Belmont. It's a great program they have there. He does have that lefty release, which seems to cause a lot of problems for defenses. He's a pretty good rebounder for a perimeter player. Again, you could blame that on the competition at that point, because at Belmont you're not playing against the top competition every night. But a really good three-point shooter. 3 seasons in college of shooting 40% or better from beyond the arc. That translates, even though it's a slightly shorter three-point line, that translates to the NBA, and that's going to be some instant offense for the Cleveland Cavaliers.
The Cavaliers team won 19 games, which is not a lot.
It's bad. It's just bad.
And I think they're a team that really kind of needed to hit it out of the park tonight. It was an important draft, one I think they had quite a few picks in. So they have the ability to start creating a foundation to go along with Colin Sexton last year. This is Darius Garland, Cameron Johnson, right?
I don't think so.
No, who was it? Didn't have a pick for them. Might be in my wires crossed, but
So this is best available.
yeah. So we have more trade news. This Brooklyn pick is going to the Los Angeles Clippers. I don't know what they're getting in return, but it sounds like the Clippers, according to Wojnarowski, are interested in Mfiondu Kabengele, another guy you thought maybe would be lucky to have fall to the Spurs here.
And I'm looking at this again here. The Cavs have only had Garland.
Okay,
and
Darling.
Windler.
Okay, never mind.
I'm looking at their cap situation right now for Cleveland. Kevin Love, Tristan Thompson, J.R. Smith is partially guaranteed. They still have Brandon Knight and Jordan Clarkson under contract for the last year. John Henson, Matthew Dellavedova, Colin Sexton, Shetty Osman, and Larry Nance's extension kicks in this year.
So a lot of remnants from the last James kind of run.
Yeah, they are way over the cap. They're definitely trying to move off of at least J.R. Smith's contract, which is only partially guaranteed at this point. They would love to also dump any one of Thompson, Knight, Clarkson, Henson, or Dellavedova, who are all due at least $9 million and are all expiring this year. But on the flip side, they're expiring this year. There's a ton of cap space. The Cavs are probably going to be bad again this year, and you can get some of these young guys some reps. So sorry, Cleveland. It's going to be another long winter.
Oh yeah. Now let's pivot to this this Clippers team then, Los Angeles Clippers, who are taking this 27th pick in the trade for Brooklyn. No word on what the Clippers are sending to Brooklyn in return. But this Clipper teams, I think, is one of the surprise. We talked a little bit about the Magic being a surprise. Clippers traded their best player 2 years in a row, Blake Griffin 1 year, Tobias Harris the next year, and still made a playoff run and took on the Warriors in a very, I guess, a hard-fought series there. A lot of young pieces on this Clippers team, and they also are a team that's been linked to bringing in Kawhi Leonard as a max guy. A team that's on the rise there that could propel themselves further into the playoffs here. Mfiondu Kabengele is a player we talked about, sixth man in Florida State, a center, adds some depth, adds a little bit of scoring, rebounding skills as well.
This is the Wojnarowski response to what you're saying. What the Clippers are sending the Nets in order to get this pick. It's a 2020 first-round pick from Philadelphia and the 56th pick tonight. So, kind of a low risk, low reward kind of trade. The Sixers pick next year is going to be pretty late in the draft, a late second rounder, and the Clippers able to jump into the late first round here tonight, and they had already given up their first round pick tonight. So this is their first pick tonight.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've talked about this a little bit. A lot of pick swaps. Not a lot of players. Aaron Baines, I think, is the one player who's moved during the draft so far.
Yeah.
We saw T.J. Warren earlier, Mike Conley the day before. But yeah, players are pretty much staying put. So that pick is locked in now for the Los Angeles Clippers, coming from Brooklyn. And yeah, there they are selecting Mfiondu Kabengele.
Another guy that I think the Spurs maybe were hoping would fall to them. I think you were saying, but it's, again, we're right in that range, and the Spurs, I think we had talked about it earlier tonight or on the last podcast, Jackson. We were saying maybe they need to make a move and move up just a few spots from 19 and 29 because there are some good players, but I think there are enough teams ahead of them that are just a few spots ahead of them that are going to covet those same guys, and we're seeing that here tonight.
So, Cameron, they are right where they need to be if they want Bol.
That's right. I can't get ahead of myself.
Golden State's on the clock right now.
Anything is up in the air for Golden State right now.
Yes.
At 28. Really, who knows what they're probably just pick the best guy available.
I think so. I mean, this is a team that's been able to kind of make the most out of picking in these kind of into the first round, similar to the Spurs, making the most out of getting guys like Jordan Bell, Kevon Looney. Sounds like Jordan Poole might be going to them here. Swaggy Poole heading to Golden State.
That is a reach. That's great news for the Spurs because he was not projected to be a first-round guy in just about any mock draft I had seen. Great player. But I think there's been a little bit of a what's also interesting is that he's going here not too long after the Cavs picking, and John Beilein now, the former Michigan coach, is the head coach of the Cavs. But granted, the coach is not making the decisions. It's the GM who's making the decisions. Yeah. So it's possible Beeline could have been in his ear and said, hey, I really like Jordan Poole, but Cavs decide not to go with it. But that's just interesting to me if that's where the Warriors end up going. But
for sure. You want to talk a little bit about Capangeli? Is there any sort of fit that you see him filling for the Clippers here?
He's just an energy guy. I mean, the Clippers, the reason they took Golden State to 6 games, they just fought, man. They had a bunch of guys who just were out there scrapping and fighting, and he fits that culture. I like what the Clippers are doing. I think they're setting themselves up really well, assuming they're going to go. They're going to get somebody. They have cap room. They're going to have somebody. Some big name on this roster on opening day, whether it's Kawhi Leonard or Jimmy Butler or DeMarcus Cousins, Kemba Walker. Somebody good is going to be on that team, and they're going to be surrounded by a bunch of tough, hard-nosed players who know their role and play it pretty well. Capangeli is the quintessential energy guy.
Yeah, and I mean, it also starts with the coaching staff there. I think Doc Rivers adds a little bit of that tough. He's always had tough teams, and he's always been able to make the most out of players who can bring that energy and toughness. You think about a guy like Avery Bradley, thrived under Doc Rivers' system here in Boston before Rivers went to LA. That's a team that is probably going to contend for a championship depending on who they can bring in, especially in a wide open Western Conference. We haven't talked about it too much, but there are some teams like the Clippers. We saw the Jazz make a move here to get Conley. I think a lot of these teams are going to start looking at the scenario here, thinking Golden State, they're not going to be competing next year, all things considered. Who knows what Los Angeles Lakers can do around LeBron James and Anthony Davis? Maybe they're not competing. The Rockets seem to be on the back end of this window here.
And they have all kinds of internal strife going on between D'Antoni and the front office and Chris Paul and James Harden.
Oh, yeah. They've had a whole assistant coaching purge. When you fire a bunch of coaches like that,
not a good sign.
All of the things that went under the radar for your team, all of that kind of smoke comes out as those coaching staffs. You want to kind of get some sort of revenge. So you're hearing a lot of, a lot of squeaky wheels about kind of the issues they're having in the Rockets. So this is the time, I think, if you're a team like the Clippers, to jump in and go all in and try to win now. This could be your window.
You saw how quickly a championship team can come together, and I mean, not just in the course of a season, but some of the key pieces, Marc Gasol in particular, in the middle of the season for Toronto, and Houston's been sort of following that same model where it's not just the team that's there on opening day, but the team that is there that you put together the trade deadline. Cleveland did it in 2018.
Philadelphia kind of tried to do it with bringing in Tobias Harris and Jimmy Butler.
It's been a kind of an inversion of what the Spurs model has been, which is where you keep the same team together for years and years and years. Not to say that's not going to work, because it has worked and it will continue to work for teams, especially to kind of overperform what the talent level is. And you could make the argument that the Sixers this year underperformed the amount of talent that was on their team.
For sure.
And that could be a side effect of the fact that you're bringing in 2 All-Stars who you're bringing in at the trade deadline. Here, learn how to play with these 2 other All-Stars. Good luck, figure it out.
I think the narrative around that Sixers team is different if Kawhi's 4-bounce shot falls out.
Oh, yeah.
So, but again, a team that I think if they can try to bring all those pieces back together, a little more time with those guys is only going to help them out here. This might be a time for a Western Conference team to try to build on the fly like that. Let's look ahead here. The Spurs are only 2 picks away. If the Warriors are taking Jordan Poole, that means there's a lot of talented players there who have fallen, I guess, fallen below where they were projected to go.
Oh, look who's number 1 on the ESPN Best Available.
There we go.
Right?
We have Bol listed number 1. I think Kevin Porter's a guy down here who probably expected to go a little earlier.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of players who we've talked about in the podcast that maybe we bring in for the Spurs. You talk about someone like Carson Edwards, players like that who have a little bit more experience. There's a lot of great players here on the board for the Spurs to take.
I think they need to draft a big man. I think we're starting to see it now, especially at this point in the draft, with Jordan Poole being, I think, a fairly extreme reach by the Warriors. But they know what their system is. They like young guards who can shoot the basketball, and Quinn Cook is going to be in a bigger role with this team, with Klay Thompson being out. They're assuming they're going to re-sign Klay Thompson, but be without him with that leg injury. Go get a shooting guard. Go get a guy who can play on the wing next to Steph Curry, keep the floor spaced, and kind of just plug and play. part in the Warriors machine, and they're still going to be they're still going to have separate. They're still going to be a playoff team, but I think they're probably more of a 6 seed is where people are kind of saying the Warriors are at in the West right now. I think that's discounting the sort of the heart of the champion, and I think some of these guys come back early. They'll find something. If Kevin Durant ends up leaving, that's still a max salary slot that they'll have picked up to be able to pick up somewhere and go do something with. This Warriors team will be fine. I don't think this is a whiff of a pick, but it could be.
Yeah. It might be a sign of the times here in the way the NBA is going. This is a team that's losing Kevin Durant for all of next season. It's losing DeMarcus Cousins. This is a team where I think the lack of front court depth really hurt them in the playoffs, and they're not going out and trying to find a front court fill here. So maybe, and there's so many big guys left here that we've been talking about. You're talking about Bruno Fernando, Bol. I like Nick Claxton. I thought he'd be a kind of guy that fit on this Warriors team.
Yeah, he'd be a good fit for the Warriors, but I think he'd also be a good fit for the Spurs.
So. I would be so happy. We haven't talked about him yet. He played point guard at Georgia at 6'10", 6'11", which is really impressive. And I mean, the Spurs haven't had a big man playmaker like that, but you're talking about someone who has shown signs of being someone like Al Horford. He's the ceiling comparison, I think, if you bring in someone like Nick Claxton. He might be a steal in the second round for one of these teams here.
Probably at this point with 2 picks left in the first round, somebody, whether it's Bol, Nick Claxton, or a handful of other guys, is going to be a steal in the second round.
Oh, yeah.
The guy I'm surprised that the Warriors didn't go after was Keldon Johnson from Kentucky.
Oh, yeah.
6'6" swingman, 3-and-D kind of guy who has that finishing ability at the rim, but also shot 38% from deep. Maybe not the best defender right now, but a high-effort guy. His best NBA comps were like Corey Maggette or Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Those would be guys who fit on the Warriors. Yeah. Whereas Jordan Poole had a fantastic sophomore year and obviously was part of Michigan's team that reached the national championship game back when it was in San Antonio a year ago, but not quite as talented and maybe doesn't have the same upside potential as some of these other guys. But big shot makers, they're showing that shot he made against Houston in the 2018 March Madness tournament.
Only, I think, a handful of people make that shot. You got to have the confidence to take that kind of shot. It's a Curry-esque confidence there, I think he has. And he's worked out with NBA talent in the offseason. He's a guy who really could be a boomer bust, as we talked about. I think it's a reach, like you mentioned. And this 29th pick for the Spurs is almost, I'm getting a little goosebumps. It's kind of reminding me of the talent we've been able to bring in with former 29 picks in terms of Murray and in terms of Derek White, like a guy who could be a contributor. There's a lot of really talented players out there. I know we talked about not overhyping the 29th pick. This is the end of the first round.
It's been a magical spot for the Spurs. Another guy whose name we haven't mentioned yet, who's showing up now as one of the top guys available. ESPN is saying, what do the Spurs need? Length on the wings, and this guy certainly fills that. Is KZ Okpala from Stanford. Played 2 years in college, which I think helps a lot of guys getting that extra little bit of seasoning. And what did he work on the most from his freshman to his sophomore year was his shot. And a solid rebounder, solid defender, a guy who's still kind of growing into his body a little bit in terms of he was 6'8", had a big growth spurt late in high school, and maybe a little awkward, but that's something that happens with some of these young guys and goes away after time. There's guys who are sometimes a little awkward and moving around. You saw it with Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
But it looks like, though, that's not really where the Spurs are going to go.
No, you mentioned this guy just a minute ago when talking about the Golden State Warriors. Keldon Johnson, guard forward from Kentucky, 3-and-D player. I think we mentioned earlier that the hole in the Spurs roster, the weakness, we talked a little bit about big men, but also that small forward role ever since Kawhi Leonard left. We were playing DeMar DeRozan small at that small forward position, Rudy Gay playing solid minutes off here. This could be a guy who comes in and finds notable minutes off the bench.
Yeah, Keldon Johnson, looking at maybe 3 or 4 mock drafts, nobody had him falling into the late first round. Everybody had him as a mid-first rounder, 16, 14, 15, that kind of range. You don't see a lot of Kentucky guys when they make it into the draft. You don't see them make it this long into the draft. So he's one of the knocks on him is that he doesn't really have any one huge NBA skill, but he also doesn't have any glaring weaknesses. A guy who just plays really hard. You hope that plug and play maybe is a term that's a bit overused, but for Spurs, you hope that it's applicable in this situation.
Yeah, you mentioned in your comps here, I don't know if we've talked about it here, jack of all trades, kind of a guy who can be a Swiss Army knife filling some positions, some spots here for them. I think that for the most part, though, there was a lot of talk about the Spurs making a splash, trading up, trading for some veterans and things like that. Instead, they went and drafted Luka Samanic with the 19th pick as a stash guy, and now they're bringing in Keldon Johnson from Kentucky. Could be a guy like we've seen just falling to the Spurs at the position. So yeah, the Spurs have thrived off of finding guys like this.
5 stars in every major recruiting service. Played the 1 year at Kentucky. Looking at his numbers, 13.5 points per game, almost 6 rebounds, an assist and a half. Not a big disruptive defender, less than 1 steal and 0.2 blocks. You'd maybe like a little bit more for a guy who's 6'6". But 6'6", 211, NBA kind of body. He was the SEC Freshman of the Year.
There you go.
And a McDonald's All-American, Jordan Brand Classic, Nike Hoop Summit. Kind of ran across the board. So a lot of similarities to DeJounte Murray. Guy who comes in when the Spurs have a certain need, a guy who slipped in the draft despite a very high caliber, a high pedigree coming out of high school. I love this pick for the Spurs. I think there's probably a world where this is the guy the Spurs drafted at 19, and then Sam Mitch was the guy they drafted at 29. So, end of the day, Spurs fans, I think we have to be pretty happy about the haul here on draft night. Maybe it wasn't the order we expected and had us sweating a little bit, but you knew at 29 someone was going to fall, and I think that was the hope. Maybe this wasn't this might not have been the guy everyone had in mind, but ESPN showing his brother Caleb played at Georgetown, was a 4-year guy as well. So this is a ball player.
Hey, his hobbies are fishing and bowling.
Okay,
that might be worth something, right?
He's going to fit right in San Antonio.
So we've seen the Spurs kind of make the most of some first-round picks, but not in their first year. The team isn't one to play a player they draft in this first round right off the bat. Do you think someone like Keldon Johnson finds minutes, finds any time here?
I don't think so, actually. I love the idea of letting him develop in the G League a little bit. I think this is such a situation where the Spurs are happy with the roster they have. They're happy enough with the roster that they used the 19th pick on probably a draft and stash. The Spurs had a similarly, for them, high pick last year, and Lonnie Walker didn't really make much of an impact on the varsity team. He kind of spent a long time in Austin, but put up some big numbers. And we've seen other guys who were drafted in that same spot do great things after spending a year in the G. Derek White is going to be the name I keep bringing up just because he was such a breakout guy in the postseason for the Spurs and really over the course of the season. If he's able to contribute as the 29th pick in the first round to the Spurs this upcoming year, that's great. But if not, that's fine too, because he's talented, he's very young, and has the ability to develop a lot of different talents, a lot of different skills for the Spurs.
I see a couple of people echoing that same thought that they were picked in opposite draft positions. Also, Kins5 sportscaster Joe Reinagel echoing your optimism with this pick. He says on Twitter, that's a pick to get excited about.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's this year we see it, but in the future he's the kind of guy that could make the jump here in the second year, third year.
And that's really when the Spurs are going to need something.
Exactly.
When this kind of current core, as it's constructed, is going to no longer be sustainable. Their contracts will be up. DeJounte Murray is up after this upcoming season. He's going to get paid. You have other guys who are contributors right now, like Marco Bellinelli, whose contract is up and probably not going to be renewed, just because he's starting to get on the wrong side of 30 and really is a defensive liability on a team that's had some struggles defensively. So yeah, his timeline lines up really well with what the Spurs need, and low risk right now because it's the 29th pick, potentially very high upside. You don't get 5 stars out of high school. You don't get a scholarship offer from Kentucky if you're a bum.
Exactly. I mean, they're someone who's gone out and find that blue chip talent and has success with the one and done. This pick kind of, I think the whole draft in general kind of serves both purposes. As we talked, I was kind of hoping the Spurs would look towards DeJounte Murray's prime, and this is a guy who could be a solid role player, a starter for this team in the next 4 to 5 years when DeJounte is 26, and they're aiming for that kind of rebuild for the second kind of for the next iteration of this team, if you will. But at the same time, the whole draft keeps them in the win now mode. They didn't fill up too many roster positions. They've found their guys that they wanted, arguably. They really wanted Samanic. He's a stash guy over there. Maybe we'll see him in the next couple of years. And then Keldon Johnson is the talent that fell to them. They went out and picked, I think, maybe what they consider the best guy in the draft at this point.
At this point, yeah. Talk about lottery level talent that was projected to be right at the edge of the lottery. I mean, you see this a lot with Kentucky guys, to be quite honest, because they bring in so many good young guys at a time. Somebody kind of climbs up and kind of pushes some other guys aside sometimes. And then they get to the league, and you're like, oh yeah, that guy can really ball. That's going to be the case here, I think, with Johnson and the Spurs. What this lines up though for San Antonio, two rosters, assuming Samanic's stash, and assuming they do re-sign Rudy Gay, looking into free agency. And again, they do have one more pick. They do have that 49th pick. Probably going to be a guy that they would take and make a two-way contract, or hold off on and kind of see how free agency shakes out. Maybe do what they did with Chimezie Metu and offer a 2-year deal if they really like him, with the second year maybe only partially guaranteed or whatever. I think you got to go out and get another big man. Add to the big rotation. Coming into this past season, it was Pau Gasol's roster spot. They can do better. They have the money that they had been spending on Pau and a couple other guys. They can turn that into something that is, not to take anything away from Pau Gasol, because he's had a fantastic career, but who can give the Spurs more than what Pau Gasol gave them last year.
Yeah, he was definitely on the decline of his career, and really just didn't make the contribution that I think the Spurs hoped he could and that the Spurs needed. They've got Jakob Poeltl, they've got Davis Bertans, LaMarcus Aldridge, obviously. Yeah, there's that hole there at the center. Chimezie Metu, I don't think he's going to get 15 minutes a game. He might get 8 minutes a game if they keep him around. So there is a hole there. And then that leaves one more roster position if you want to make a splash and try to get someone like Bogdanovich. You're going to have to clear some cap space, but it kind of gives them some flexibility to look at the free agency market, see who's available, see who's around, see who fits their price range. And yeah, they can find that last spot.
Yeah, presumably the price range is going to be, they'll have about 10, 11 million, maybe more like 9 million to go out and spend. That can get you a decent center in this free agency world. You're not going to get a superstar.
Yeah.
They don't need a superstar.
I think in the past, optimistically, we talked about maybe Brook Lopez. He's going to be too expensive. But we'll look forward to the free agency as that comes around here in the next few weeks. It's rapidly approaching.
Few days. It's 10 days.
10 days, cool.
Yeah, it's June 30th is the start of free agency. They moved it up from July 1st at midnight. Remember, that was the whole thing. And
yes.
They said, we're trying to give everybody a good night's sleep. But everyone knows that's just, I think it'll keep moving up. I think in the future, the free agency period, I think ideally we'll actually move ahead of the draft, or at least kind of simultaneously with the draft, because everyone sort of knows what's going on anyway in free agency at this point, and free agency has been kind of going on for some guys like Kyrie, KD. KD a little bit less so because he was playing, but since their seasons ended, and that was more than a month ago now for a lot of these guys.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about how we like both these picks. If you were going to put a letter grade on the Spurs draft?
Zoomed all the way out, I think you can't give it any worse than a B+.
Yeah.
It could just be what you and I think, and we've kind of talked ourselves into this role of saying, hey, the Spurs need a center. Maybe they really are, are really happy with Jakob Poeltl and really think that he is a starting caliber center who's going to be, a minutes eater, and, Chimezie Metu makes a leap and can really help with some of these smaller lineups. They have a potential free agent in mind. LaMarcus Aldridge ends up playing some more minutes at the 5 as they kind of go bigger. I don't know.
Maybe the blueprint's there based on past Spurs teams where they've made do with Thiago Splitter at the 5, but more often than not, Duncan's transitioning to that spot. They bring in Boris Diaw. Maybe we'll see Poeltl kind of in that same role. He starts at the 5, and they'll spend most of the game transitioning Aldridge to that spot and playing
smaller,
like
and
a
faster.
rotational thing.
Yeah. I think that's what a lot of teams do, where you either start with 2 big men or 1 really big man, and then kind of move some other guys around. You can't question the talent the Spurs got. The Spurs got a lot of talent added to their roster tonight, and that's the biggest thing. There's big guys who are out there. You can find big guys if that's what the question is about. Is, hey, can we go out and find another big body that we can throw out there in some of these games to kind of grind it out. In the playoffs, when you're trying to win championships, you need the talent, and the Spurs added some top-line talent tonight.
I think the Spurs, and I hate saying the Spurs did anything that was less than skillful, because this is a front office that has proven to be one of the best at finding talent, especially in these later picks and in the second round. But I think they definitely got lucky that when they reached for Samanic, there was a player like Keldon Johnson to take in this 29th spot. I think if they end up taking someone else, if they end up taking Jordan Poole, this position, or someone who was more projected to be a late first, early second talent, we might be looking at saying, this is a C+ kind of draft. But the talent was there at 29 with Keldon Johnson for them to take, so they kind of saved themselves. I think we kind of hit this a little bit. Those could have been switched. Keldon Johnson could have been the 19th pick, and Samanic could have been the 29th. But
they did what they needed to do. I think they felt they needed to stash one of their two guys, and really the only guy who's stashable this year, I don't think Bitadze is going to be stashed. I think he's coming over. So Samanic is the only first-round pick who's going to be stashed, and the Spurs got him. I think that's valuable.
Bruno Fernando, maybe, but he was less talented than Samanic. So.
Yeah. So looks like we have a couple other trades here right at the end of the first round as we start to transition over into the second round.
Yeah, this is Kevin Porter. The thing says the Bucks. He's not going to the Bucks.
No, it looks like the Cavs are getting him. They made a trade with the Pistons to target Porter, and the Pistons have Milwaukee's pick because of that Tony Snell trade that happened, was that
yesterday,
last night or 2 nights ago? Yeah, John Lure, Tony Snell. So what that does is it means the Cavs are getting a third rookie now. So the Cavs have Darius Garland, Dylan Windler, and Kevin Porter Jr. 3 wings, basically, 3 guard, 3 wings. No big men there, but they have some bigs already on that roster. Larry Nance, Tristan Thompson, Kevin Love. Brooklyn has the 31st pick there, apparently are willing to trade that. Another trade, the 76ers are trading Jonathan Simmons and the 42nd pick to the Wizards.
Wow.
And I'm not sure what they're getting in return, but the Sixers now clearing Jonathan Simmons' contract off the books.
Yeah, he was, I think, $15 million for that.
Yeah, what a great story, by the way. If you don't know Jonathan Simmons' story, Google it really quick because it's fantastic. He's a guy who paid for his own tryout for the Austin Spurs. He was a community college guy, got on with the University of Houston, I think. Was good but not great, didn't get drafted, paid for his own tryout. He wasn't invited to the tryouts for the Austin Spurs. Did well enough with the Austin Spurs to ultimately earn a contract with the San Antonio Spurs. Key player for them over the course of a couple playoff runs. Orlando took him away in free agency last summer.
Yes.
Paid him some big money, more than $10 million a year. How about that? To go from paying for your own tryout to getting paid more than $10 million a year to play the sport you love, was traded to Philadelphia over the course of this season, now being traded to this Washington team, which is kind of in a weird spot.
He's definitely going to find a role on that team. They've got a lot of holes to fill, and he could definitely rise into that. A really athletic guy and a very energetic player at his peak. There was in the playoffs in that season when Kawhi was out, when Popovich's wife passed away, and the Spurs had no really energy towards playing the Warriors in that first round. He was one of those guys who was stepping up and playing with toughness, playing with energy, and going out there and trying to win. And they ended up getting rewarded for that offseason, going to the Magic, and then was swapped for Markelle Fultz, first number 1 pick. So yeah. That's kind of
continuing the sort of fairy tale. We did have a comment from a viewer who was hoping that the Spurs were going to draft KZ Okpala. Similar guy. I think the Spurs might have even gotten a better version of Okpala with Johnson, so hard to be too mad, but I think, there's probably a world where Okpala would have done very well with the Spurs.
Yeah. You talk about, we were just saying athleticism with Simmons. Okpala is very athletic.
Yeah. Okpala was projected a little bit more of a late first-rounder, and Johnson projected as a mid-first-rounder, to the borderline lottery kind of guy. But similar situation, 6'6", 6'8" kind of guy. A little bit unpolished, both of them kind of a little bit more projects. Better on the offensive end than on the defensive end, but guys who play really hard, try really hard, and definitely show the potential to become great players and just hard workers. Would have been great Spurs. And who knows? I mean, Okpala's still on the board right now. he's not going to last all the way to the Spurs at 49.
But they
could move up and get him.
Exactly.
And that's when you start talking about second round picks now. The cost to move up in the second round is usually pretty low. You're talking about, okay, if they really do like Okpala, just a future second that could be protected at times. You throw in some cash.
Yeah, cash incentives definitely help.
And that was one of the other things Jackson, you and I sort of talked about before we went on the air tonight. The Lakers. We haven't talked much about the Lakers tonight. It's managed to be almost a Lakers-free pod, so we kind of broke the string here. I'm sorry for doing it, but I know there's somebody who's going to be happy that we're talking about it. That whole situation with the Anthony Davis trade, they just forgot that cap space was a thing that was important in the NBA.
We talked a little bit about it in our emergency podcast, breaking down the trade, where this trade left them some room to do some things, but not to go get a max guy. Right. They had about 23 and a half, they were reported. Yeah. I think the Lakers read those report and went, 23 and a half is not max. So that's kind of the word out there. I think ESPN's Ramona Shelburne was the first to report that. And now they're trying to rework that trade with the Pelicans. I don't think the Pelicans have any incentive to work with them.
No, and so what the problem is for the Lakers is filling out the rest of their team, because they have 6 or 7 guys under contract. You need at least 13 up to 15 to field an NBA basketball team. And if they want to have a max slot, they could clear out everything else, get Anthony Davis to waive his trade kicker, wait until July 30th to consummate the trade, and then you could have a max slot. You could go get anybody, Kevin Durant, Kemba Walker, Kawhi Leonard, whatever. That's great, but then you have 7 players. Or actually, no, because you actually had to get rid of some of those guys.
Yeah.
So what you're left with, if you're the Lakers in that situation, is you need, you're at the cap, and the only way you can go over the cap in that situation is with guys who you're re-signing who are already on your team, which is not applicable in this situation.
Yeah.
Or second-round picks who are at the minimum salary, or veterans who agree to take the veterans minimum. That doesn't count towards being over the cap. That's a special designation, and it's a formula based on how long you've been in the NBA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You could get some veterans, but there's only so many guys until you start running into guys who are actually going to start taking away more than they add to your team. I think they sort of saw a little bit of that with a guy like maybe a Michael Beasley last year, he brought some stuff to the table, but also took a lot away. So what does that leave you with? You need second-round picks. They can be very valuable. They can turn into really good players in the NBA. They can turn into decent role players. They sometimes are only good for waving the towel at the end of the bench, and because they don't hurt you salary cap wise. Problem is, Lakers don't have any second round picks, I don't think. So what you can do though, you can trade for second round picks, and what's acceptable when you trade for a second round pick is you can trade cash consideration, which means you buy a second round pick from somebody, and a team that doesn't really want to use their second round pick, doesn't have a spot for the guy, they take some amount of cash that helps with their expenses and so on.
This might be a draft to do that. If you look at the wealth of talent that is left here.
Oh, sure, the Lakers definitely want to do it, but the problem is, now that report is out there, why the heck would anybody do that for them?
Yeah.
This is just the way the Lakers Anthony Davis trade has unfolded has been incredible in that they've absolutely telegraphed their hand the entire time. They've made it known that we're only going to trade for Anthony Davis. Some of their offers were leaked to the press in February, and people were able to evaluate it, and Pelicans front office could read that and say, oh, people think this isn't enough. Well, this isn't enough.
Right.
And they clearly, once the Celtics problems were going through, it became a question of who were the Lakers bidding against, but they had to go get Anthony Davis. The whole thing blows my mind in how much it could have been done better. I don't want to say they bungled it, but they really could have done it so much better.
It's one of the wildest trades I can remember in terms of how the storylines unfolded, and I think it really speaks to the inexperience and maybe the reported turmoil of that front office. And who knows, they're showing Manu Ginobili here on the screen.
Yeah, the ESPN is showing an overlay of best second-round picks.
Yeah, and who knows, I mean, I don't know if there's any sort of faith in that front office to be able to bring in guys who can fill out that roster. I don't know where they go from here.
Yeah, that was my thing was, some of these teams have extra second-round picks now. They get moved around quite a bit, but why the heck would anybody give the Lakers a second-round pick when that is the only thing that's going to really help them have the flexibility they want? If the difference between the Lakers getting a third max guy and not is your team's willingness to give them or to sell them your second-round pick. I almost hope the rest of the NBA kind of bands together. We might have our differences, Celtics and Sixers and Rockets and Spurs, but everyone has to hold tight on this, guys, and agree not to trade your second-round pick to the Lakers. Let's go. We have the whole second round to go, but let's be strong with this.
I think the Lakers front office is
no amount of money.
I think the Lakers front office though is saying, we don't care. We have Anthony Davis.
Yeah,
and I mean,
that's probably true.
Best case scenario, they've got 2 top 5 guys, at least 2 top 10 guys. But yeah, who plays with them? Who's passing them the ball? Who's defending? They can't play 2-on-5, and they can't start Isaac Bonga at the point guard. So
no,
that's a problem. Here's our guy Nicholas Claxton going off in the start of the second round here to Brooklyn. I think this is a pick they're holding on to. We've lost. They were trying to trade it. They ended up not trading it. Nick Claxton, the center from Georgia. An incredible, excellent ball handler, probably the best ball handling center in this draft. Lacks a few of the other skills you'd expect from a big man, but might have been a first round. You could have seen him eke into that first round there. That's kind of the value of the second round, having the first pick in the second round. Plus, he's not guaranteed.
Right, yeah. You work him out, you try him out, and if you're happy with the way he fits with the other guys, you can offer him a contract then. If not, you slide him on a 2-way deal, and he can dominate the G League and doesn't cost you a roster spot. Mm-hmm. And if you have some injuries to your front line, you can bring him in for a month and a half.
Yeah,
I really like the 2-way contract. It's a relatively new addition to the NBA. This is, I think, the 3rd year of it, maybe the 4th year of it.
It provides the opportunity. Excuse me. Provides a little flexibility for these teams, but also provides the opportunity for these teams, for these players, to get experience playing in the G League and to keep working on skills and honing some skills as well. So
I see it as a great fit for a lot of the guys who come out. You see a lot of underclassmen who declared for this draft who were not first-round picks, and I think it used to be sort of a death sentence. I think the way the NBA used to be structured was, if you weren't in the first round, that second round, you could really get lost in the shuffle and sort of fall through the cracks. The G League's expansion and growth is a more viable option. The 2-way contract to make it a little bit more appeasing, I think, to the players and appealing to have that option. Hey, you can get called up pretty easily. And then the way the G League has done things like the showcase, where you're putting yourselves in front of NBA scouts regularly. I'm hoping that more and more young guys, instead of opting to go to Australia, like a certain Ball son, go to the G League instead. Stay here. Stay in the United States.
And we've talked a little bit about how this might be a future answer to the one and done of the NCAA, using this developmental league almost as a minor league system to develop players. Let's take a look quickly and just kind of talk about the rest of the first round. We talked about how we graded the Spurs. Is there another team that you think knocked it out of the park this tonight?
Oh, the Pelicans.
Yeah.
You weren't going to give them anything but an A grade for getting Zion Williamson, but I think the stuff they did around that, where they moved some pieces around, were at number 4 but traded down from number 4 to get some other stuff.
Yeah, got a lot of value for that number 4 pick, I believe.
Yeah, they turned number 4 into the number 8 pick and then also the number 17 pick.
Yeah, and that number 8 pick was Jackson Hayes, the center from Texas. 17, I think, was Nikhil Alexander-Walker. Yeah, there's a lot of value. I think they did a great job.
Yeah, that's a team with 3 first-round rookies, and the Cavs, although most of their first-round rookies were a little bit lower in the first round, you got a guy who I think a lot of people were very happy about, very excited about, in Darius Garland. I didn't watch many of his games because he didn't play many games. Playing just the 5 games at Vanderbilt, it's pretty amazing that a guy can play 5 games in college, get hurt, and then still be a top 5 pick. I think in a lot of ways that should encourage guys to go out and play hard in college. And we saw some of the injury concerns with Zion Williamson when he missed a few games at Duke. There was talk about, should he return, should he not return? That was one of the big storylines in sports talk radio for weeks. And, on the flip side of that, though, Bol is still sitting there. Bol, a guy who was a top 10 talent coming out of high school, and he's now at best 32nd and still sliding.
Yeah, it surprises me that Claxton was taken above him. I do like Claxton's skills, but there must be some really strong concerns through the league on Bol Bol's injury history. For me, I mean, it's really easy to jump out and say, I mean, these teams that have multiple picks are obviously adding more talent, but the Hawks, with the team they're building around, adding DeAndre Hunter, adding Cam Reddish, that's a lot of really young talent to put around the young talent they'd already have.
It's going to be a very young team. I'll pull up their roster really quick.
Yeah.
But yeah, you sometimes you worry about these teams that build young and don't have enough veteran leadership around it, because the thing that some of the old NBA heads will say is they get too used. It becomes too acceptable to lose.
Yeah.
You know.
This Hawks team this year had Vince Carter, who definitely helped raise the average age by maybe a decade. I think he's going to move on from this team. He still wants to play, but my guess is he goes to a team maybe like the Warriors, the Lakers, and tries to chase that ring. He hasn't been someone to chase a ring in his career, but if there was a time,
he's played on some good teams.
Yeah.
I mean, he played on the Magic when Dwight Howard was still there. He played on the Grizzlies near the grit and grind peak. He played on the Mavericks when not too long after their 2011 run. Maybe it was before that. I don't even remember. He's been on some good teams. He's also been on the
Nets,
the Suns. Yeah, he was on the Nets in his prime.
Yeah.
But here on the Hawks was always a weird fit for him. The Nets now, they still have Kent Bazemore and Miles Plumlee, who are both about 30, so there's some veteran something. Alex Len, Taurean Prince, or no, they traded Taurean Prince. John Collins, Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Bembry, Omari Spellman.
Alan Crabb was the
Alan Crabb is the addition. Yeah. That is a lot of young guys. Collins is 21 right now. Herter's 20. Bembry's 24. Spellman's 21. And Trae Young is 20 right now.
That's a team with a lot of cap space.
Yeah, because they're Carmelo Anthony's coming off their books.
That's right.
They were paying Carmelo Anthony $25 million to not play for them this year.
I think you bring him back. I think you bring Melo into this fold here. You're looking for vet experience.
They were also paying Jeremy Lin $13 million to not play for them, and Jamal Crawford $2.3 million to not play for them.
They were paying an NBA champion and Jeremy Lin there. So
yeah, right. So right now, or I guess this is not really that accurate anymore now that Taurean Prince was traded and they brought in Alan Crabb. The Hawks have, I believe, 2 max salary slots. Will they use it? Probably not.
So you're talking about, Kemba Walker and Kawhi Leonard filling out that roster there. Suddenly becoming the powerhouse in the Eastern Conference.
No, I love what the Hawks do. They're going to be bad for one more year, and then some more of those contracts come off their books, and then they're going to be really, Bazemore and Plumlee are their top 2 paid guys next year. And that following year, they're looking at having only like $25 million committed for the 2021 season.
I wonder if there's a vet they could bring in that wouldn't push them over the hump of being a horrible team into kind of one of these middling, maybe 12 to 18 kind of picks.
Tobias Harris would be an interesting fit there.
He would be. I think Al Horford might be one as well.
I think he would like that too. Is he has the connection? I mean, he played there for so many years.
Yeah.
That would be a fun full circle. They kind of do need a center because John Collins isn't really a center. He's more of a 4. That's a team to watch. They're in the same spot right now where like the Sixers and Celtics were like 2 or 3 years ago, where you were saying, "Hey, watch out for these guys." They're getting there. I think Denver was kind of in a similar spot recently. Watch out for these guys. They're going to get there. Golden State kind of came out of nowhere, though. Maybe not out of nowhere. I think
they were a watch out for these guys. They made a big splash that first playoff series when they took on the San Antonio Spurs. But yeah, there was a team that was like, watch out, and then they put the pieces together and actually made the run. You don't see too many teams do that. Like you said, like we've been talking about too, the Celtics, that window closed pretty quickly for them. So if I'm the Hawks, maybe I do think about making sure we win while we've got Trae Young on a rookie deal, while we've got these kind of guys maybe make a run for playoffs here. Yeah,
the window closes fast. Just ask the Sixers because Trae Young is good. I don't know if he's going to end up being the best player on a championship team. Good. That's what you need in the NBA. I mean, if you can find a way to make one of your 2 best players on a rookie scale contract, you're in great shape. And if both of them are on rookie scale deals, then just be careful and don't put all your eggs in one basket, because the Sixers had a ton of assets and they cashed them all in for this year and then didn't even make the conference finals. So
who are the head scratchers from the first round?
Good question. I think in a vacuum, the Samanic at 19 would have been probably one of the top head scratchers. As it was, the Spurs made it all work out just fine. I still don't really know what the Celtics are doing.
That was going to be my pick. I honestly like some of the players they drafted and traded more than the players they traded for. Tybull, you're talking about Ty Jerome as well, was the guy they drafted and took away. I don't understand the Grant Williams and how he fits with the way the team's built. And Romeo Langford, I'm not sure how he's going to fit in that roster as well.
Yeah, I'll pull up their roster as well for the next season. They just have so many young guys, and some of them were a part of that team that reached the conference finals, pushed the Cavaliers to 7 games last that 2018 conference finals, and then Kyrie came back. Gordon Hayward came back, and suddenly it was, just a weird team. So Marcus Smart is still is now their second highest paid player behind Gordon Hayward. They still have Jason Tatum. They traded Aaron Baines tonight, which was another weird thing. Terry Rozier is a free agent this summer. Marcus Morris is a free agent. They probably are not re-signing him.
I would imagine so. I would imagine not. I think he might be a guy who ends up on the Lakers.
That he'd be a really good fit, and he's a guy who might consider taking the minimum. He's made plenty of money in his career. He's 29 or 30. He was $5.5 million this year. Semi Ojeleye, Robert Williams, Gershon Yabusele, just a lot of these young kind of forwards that the Celtics have.
And they added
more of them. Yeah, Romeo Langford is sort of a weird chemistry guy sometimes. He certainly has the talent though. And then Grant Williams added to that team. It felt like they could have done a little bit more. That was a team that I was surprised didn't go after Bol Bol.
Yes. I think this is a team that might be setting itself up to sign some free agents. They kind of made some room by sending off Aaron Baines, who was kind of not a large contract, but a moderate contract. And maybe and they're clearing some space. Who knows with Irving? Who knows with Horford? That's a team with a lot of money. I don't know who's out there who's going to join the Celtics.
If they can get a top-line guard, what I think would be interesting is if Kyrie goes to Brooklyn, which is what everyone is rumoring, then D'Angelo Russell going down the street to Boston makes a lot of sense. And that turns into a really young team with a lot of talent. You have some of the star power with D'Angelo Russell and Gordon Hayward. Marcus Smart is just a tough, hard-nosed guy. Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown will get the ball a little bit more without Kyrie and Horford there. And then you could start to develop, see what you can get out of either Yabusele, Semi Ojeleye. Daniel Tace is a free agent this summer. They could bring him back. But yeah, it's a weird. They're in a weird spot with still having a bunch of assets too.
Yeah. So if the Celtics team brings in Russell, and then we mentioned DeMarcus Cousins, that's a contending team all of a sudden. Yeah, you're talking about Russell, Brown, Tatum, Hayward, and Cousins maybe as your starting five.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Yeah, no, and the Sixers are kind of also a team where I don't think they're going to keep both Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris. They definitely can't do that and also keep J.J. Redick.
Yeah.
J.J. Redick, I think, is another top candidate to go to the Lakers.
I could see him being a vet minimum kind of guy as well.
He would absolutely take a pay cut to go after a ring. He's been close a couple times. He had that one really big payday with the Sixers a couple years ago when they sort of made that surprise one-year signing with him.
They had the money to spend.
They had the money to spend, so they spent it on him, and then they sort of made a little bit of a leap.
And that's a bit of I wouldn't say homecoming, but a returning to familiar ground in L.A. for Redick, a guy who spent much of his, I guess, the best years of his career on those Clippers teams.
Yeah, he's a key player at the Staples Center, and to have him go across the way to the Lakers, and the fact that he hasn't played with LeBron at this point in his career is kind of amazing because it feels like he is just such a good LeBron complementary guy.
In that kind of Mike Miller, Kyle Korver role.
Absolutely. He might even be the best guy in that role at this point in his career.
Not quite Ray Allen, but yeah.
Spurs fans, we're sorry.
Yeah, sorry to bring that one up.
Yeah.
Sad.
We almost made it through a whole podcast, Jackson, without bringing up 2013.
I'm kind of curious as to what Minnesota was doing, too. Trading up for Jarrett Culver, moving from Saric. I guess they just didn't like the fit with Saric on that team.
That is, I hadn't really thought about poor Minnesota. We sort of talked about it a little bit when it happened. Andrew Wiggins, is his contract kicking in this year, or did it already kick in? I think it kicks in this year. Yeah, it's a big contract, and unless he makes a jump, it's not a good contract.
I think we've mentioned a few bad contracts so far. We mentioned John Wall's contract. We haven't mentioned Chris Paul, but he's another bad contract as well.
Russell Westbrook.
Russell Westbrook's bad contract. Yeah, Wiggins is up there, and he's far and away, I think, the youngest of those guys we just listed.
And certainly has the upside as Philadelphia's picking Bruno Fernando out of Maryland.
A backup to Embiid, maybe?
Yeah, big, strong, back-to-the-basket post player who doesn't demand the ball much. I think he would have been a decent fit for San Antonio, but they would have needed him this is right about where he was expected to be. Yeah. Anyway, Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns is a 1-2. They kind of need a third guy because Wiggins is not – you're not going to be a great team if Andrew Wiggins is your second best guy. Yeah. Unfortunately, he's getting paid like he's the best guy. And that's where the problem is when you start paying guys who you pay guys more than what their value is on that team. And the Spurs kind of ran into that a little bit this year with Pau Gasol. Patty Mills is on a pretty big contract, but he's so important to this team heart-wise and chemistry-wise. And his contract is nowhere near. I think Andrew Wiggins making 4 times as much as Patty Mills.
Patty Mills has that corporate knowledge, and for Wiggins, you got to also kind of consider as well that this is a team that I think has gone through a couple different philosophy changes throughout his time there. I don't know if Thibodeau was great for him. Thibodeau is a guy who is known for kind of wearing some players down. But yeah, that Minnesota, I don't know if Jarrett Culver, how he's going to fit into that, but that remains to be seen. Again, it's a top 5 caliber kind of talent there with that 6th pick. So you are getting a little bit of value from Saric. But yeah, it's a head scratcher to me.
Yeah. But overall, as we kind of, I think, start to wrap this up talking about the Spurs, I'm excited. I'm excited for what they brought on with Johnson. I'm not sure how much we'll see him. I think this is kind of like a broken record. I think I was saying the same things last year when we were talking about Lonnie Walker. High potential guy, fits the Spurs nicely. Not sure what his role is in the first year.
Yeah, he got a playoff minute. One playoff minute. Yeah, but yeah, a guy who's going to, I think, step into a larger role here in the second year.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of the philosophy the Spurs have put in place here. And I think we're going to see the same thing with these picks as well. Keep Samanic overseas for a little bit. Bring him, hopefully, in a few years. He'll get some run with the Summer League the same way we've seen Milutinov kind of do that. Livio John Charles has run with the Summer League a few times. But yeah, I think, there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic for Spurs fans leaving this draft. I think, all things considered, we talked a lot about these teams with multiple picks end up looking like the winners of the draft. They end up with more talent than the others from the draft, obviously. And the Spurs have to be one of those 5 teams that really won the draft tonight.
Yeah. The team is in a good place. Their ceiling right now is probably not quite championship, but they're firmly in the playoff picture right now, and you can't ask for too much more.
Yeah.
As a whole bunch of chips still have to fall in free agency. Now, if Kyrie comes west, if Kawhi comes west, if some of these other big name guys move to the Western Conference.
Those are talent that those make teams instant contenders.
Oh yeah. The Spurs could be at risk of falling out of the playoff picture.
Yeah.
But they are absolutely thinking playoffs this year. They're also in a position where if it doesn't work this year, they're not married to it for a long time. And that's really important because if, let's say, Kyrie, Kawhi, Jimmy Butler, Tobias Harris even as a complimentary guy, if those guys all move from the Eastern Conference to the Western Conference, somebody's going to get knocked out of the playoffs.
Yeah.
The Spurs, as the 7 seed, without adding too much more, would need big jumps from some of the guys on that roster from year 1 to year 2, or DeJounte Murray, it's his 3rd year, but really only, or his 4th year, but only 3rd year playing. They need some big leaps, and we haven't necessarily seen that would be out there. So if the playoff streak does come to an end this upcoming season, what the Spurs did tonight set them up for the future.
That's a great way to a great synopsis for this draft for them. And yeah, I think the West is wide open right now. Free agency, like you said, is really going to change some things. Out of the teams in the playoffs, the Spurs seem the likely contenders to fall out.
But we said that last year.
Exactly. I don't think the Clippers. I think the Clippers are going to make a couple moves here. They've been linked to Kawhi Leonard. who knows with Golden State? Is Curry enough to keep them in the playoff hunt?
I don't think they're going to go from 5 finals appearances to missing the playoffs. It's possible.
It could be one of those Western Conference years where 8 teams has 50 wins.
That's Utah's not going to get any worse. Not adding Mike Conley, Donovan Mitchell in his 3rd year. They were kind of disappointing. Houston, they still have James Harden, and he's still in his prime.
Yeah, he's still an MVP
Dallas is going to
candidate.
be mean with Kristaps Porzingis. He's a restricted free agent, so he could technically leave, but I don't think he will.
Yeah. The Kings were a surprise team. I don't think they're yet to that point of making a playoff push, but
they're
they're
only
right
going to be.
there.
They're not going to be any worse. They're not going to be any less close, I don't think, than they were this past year. They gave the Spurs all kinds of problems. Portland and Denver are both, teams that made it further than the Spurs this past year and were top half of the top quarter of the league. They're good.
And this was a Western Conference where the Lakers didn't make the playoffs last year. So
With LeBron, and they just added AD.
The expectation is they might be up there and someone's falling. But we'll see how free agency plays out with. Do you think we're ready to wrap it up, or any last final comments here?
Yeah, I think
this is a 3-hour marathon.
Yeah, I'm starting to feel it. It's been a really fun evening. Thank you guys, everyone who stuck with us and watched for any chunk of time. Remember, we'll have this turned into a podcast available, or might even have to split it in 2.
We'll see. It's a long one.
Something will be up on kens5.com, wherever you get your podcast, Podbean, Apple, Spotify.
Stitcher. It's up there as well. And then, of course, kens5.com/bigfunpod. You can find all those links. We've got a link to that in our YouTube here. So click on that if you are interested in checking out our past episodes. Or
we have another future episode coming out pretty soon.
Yes, we're going to do a special look at the 1999 Spurs NBA championship team.
Yeah, that was a fun. We recorded that one already, so we're really excited for you all to hear that.
Yeah.
Had Ken's 5 digital reporter David Flores, a legend here in the San Antonio sports community, providing that wisdom and that insight into that 1999 season. A really fun look back. Excited to share that one with you guys, and then free agency starting in a little more than a week.
Right around the corner, and of course we'll be there covering all of the moves in the offseason here for the NBA. NBA offseason, legendary for being full of more punches, full of more surprises, wheeling and dealing than the regular season here. It's exciting times for NBA fans. I'm excited. Cameron, I think you're excited too.
Oh, yeah.
Both of us are optimistic after this draft as well.
Yeah.
So we'll see how far that optimism gets us going into free agency. This has been fun. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you guys again, as Cameron said, for joining us. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Good night.